Hi everyone, we are Nightmare Narratives and we are here to help you today. I know you will use this video to fall asleep before, so like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When Alina first set foot into her grandmother's old home, she was met with an eerie quietness that seemed to cling to every wall, every piece of furniture, and every object in the house. It was a modest two-story house on the outskirts of Waverly, a small town far removed from the life she'd been used to in the city. The house, though cozy from the outside with its quaint garden and warm brick exterior, seemed to shift in personality as soon as the front door closed behind her. As she walked through the narrow hallways, her footsteps echoed against the polished wooden floors, and Alina couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. The silence of the house was thick, not the peaceful kind, but the sort that held secrets, echoes of lives long past. Everything in the house seemed frozen in time, as though her grandmother had just stepped out for a moment and would return at any second. A thin layer of dust coated the furniture, and a faint smell of lavender lingered in the air, mingling with something else, a stale, earthy scent that seemed to come from the very walls. Alina ran her fingers along the smooth banister leading up the stairs, remembering how she had slid down it as a child, always laughing while her grandmother pretended to scold her. This house held memories of summer days, holidays, and warmth. But now, with her grandmother gone, it felt different, almost as if the house itself had aged, lost its luster, and taken on a darker, more secretive personality. Her grandmother had always been a collector of oddities, old clocks, antique mirrors, peculiar trinkets from various parts of the world. The living room, in particular, was like a museum, with each shelf and table holding something strange or beautiful. As Alina's gaze wandered around the room, a peculiar object caught her eye, a doll placed carefully on the top shelf. She approached it slowly, feeling a strange reluctance building inside her. The doll was an antique, maybe even a century old. It wore a faded blue dress with lace trim, and its face was delicate, made of porcelain, with cheeks slightly chipped and cracked from age. But it was the eyes that unsettled her. They were a deep, piercing brown, unnervingly realistic, as though someone had taken great care to make sure they looked almost alive. Those eyes seemed to follow her as she moved across the room, a subtle glint in them that caught the fading light filtering through the curtains. Alina reached out and gently lifted the doll from the shelf, surprised by how cold it felt to the touch, as if it had been stored in a freezer rather than sitting out in the open. Her fingers brushed over its hands, sculpted delicately, and placed on its lap in a manner that seemed both innocent and ominous. She couldn't recall her grandmother ever mentioning this doll, though she had visited her here countless times over the years. Had it been hidden away all this time? Or had her grandmother recently acquired it and forgotten to mention it? For a moment, Alina was lost in thought, staring at the doll, captivated by its eerie charm. But as she held it, a creeping unease spread through her, like ice tracing down her spine. She quickly set it back on the shelf, mentally brushing off the odd feeling. It was just a doll after all. She told herself it was only her imagination, heightened by the nostalgia of the house and the weight of her grandmother's absence. Turning her back on the doll, Alina resumed unpacking, opening boxes, and arranging her things around the house. She was determined to make this place feel like home again, despite the strange aura that seemed to cling to it now. She wanted this fresh start, to move on from her life in the city and the stress that had followed her there. After hours of arranging, unpacking, and cleaning, Alina felt herself beginning to unwind, settling into the rhythm of her new environment. That night, after a simple meal, she made a cup of tea and settled into her grandmother's favorite armchair by the fireplace. She let herself drift in thought, listening to the old house creak and settle. It sounds both familiar and somehow foreign. She found her eyes drifting back to the doll on the shelf. Its unblinking stare seemed fixed on her, the glassy brown eyes catching the low light in a way that made them almost seem to glimmer. Just as she was about to look away, Alina thought she saw a movement out of the corner of her eye, a subtle shift. Her breath caught in her throat as her gaze snapped back to the doll, but it remained in the same position, hands on its lap, face tilted slightly forward, staring. She felt her skin prickle as she tried to convince herself that it was just a trick of the light, a mere product of her own tired mind playing tricks on her. But the feeling didn't go away. She could have sworn it had been in a different position when she first sat down, facing slightly to the left, not directly at her. Trying to brush off the unsettling thought, she finished her tea and decided to call it a night. The doll was just an old, dusty relic of her grandmother's collection, she reminded herself. Nothing more. In the quiet of her bedroom, Alina lay awake, unable to shake the sense of being watched. She tried listening to the soothing sounds of the house settling, hoping it would lull her to sleep, but every small creak, every tiny shift in the air, only heightened her awareness. She replayed her first sight of the doll in her mind, trying to remember if she had perhaps moved it without realizing. But the memory felt disjointed, blurred, as though something was intentionally obscuring it. As sleep finally began to pull her under, she thought she heard a faint rustling, almost like footsteps. Her heart thudded as she lay frozen in bed, straining to listen. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Eventually, sleep claimed her, but it was restless and filled with strange dreams. A doll with lifelike eyes, a house with walls that seemed to breathe, and her grandmother's voice, distant and muffled, warning her of something she couldn't understand. The next morning, sunlight filtered through her window, casting warm patches across her room. Alina shook off the remnants of her uneasy dreams and got out of bed, convincing herself that it had all been a result of her overactive imagination. Determined to shake the uneasy feeling, she prepared breakfast and went about her day, trying to bring life back to the house with music and activity. But when she returned to the living room later that day, her heart nearly stopped. The doll was no longer on the shelf. Instead, it was perched on the end table beside her grandmother's chair, the one she had sat in the night before. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, and its eyes seemed to be staring directly at her. Alina's pulse raced as she tried to make sense of it. She was certain she hadn't moved the doll. She hadn't touched it since yesterday, and yet, there it was, positioned as if it had been watching her all along. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she slowly approached the doll, looking into its unblinking eyes, now appearing darker, almost as if they held a depth she hadn't noticed before. Swallowing hard, she reached out, lifting the doll with trembling hands. Once again, it felt unnaturally cold, like it had been sitting in ice rather than in a warm room. Alina's fingers brushed along the fabric of its dress, noticing that the lace at its collar was tattered, frayed, almost as if worn from handling. She placed it back on the shelf, telling herself that she must have been mistaken, that she'd moved it without remembering. But deep down, a gnawing suspicion had taken root, a dark, unsettling feeling that this doll was not just an innocent relic from her grandmother's collection. It felt as though it held something, a part of the house that was still alive, still waiting. And, as much as she tried to ignore it, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone in the house. Days passed, and Alina did her best to settle into a routine. But each day, that doll, now more of a haunting figure than a mere ornament, seemed to disrupt her sense of peace. No matter where she placed it, she would find it in odd places throughout the house, each appearance more inexplicable than the last. She began leaving it in the most unlikely locations to see if it truly was being moved. On the top shelf in her closet, tucked away in the pantry, and once inside a locked drawer in her grandmother's old desk. But inevitably, it would reappear in the open, often somewhere she had been moments before, staring up at her with that glassy, lifelike gaze. The first real confrontation happened late one evening after she'd spent hours reorganizing her kitchen cabinets. Alina was exhausted, wiping her hands clean and preparing to wind down with a cup of tea when, out of nowhere, she heard a soft thud. She froze, her senses immediately on edge, and strained her ears to identify the source. It sounded as though something had fallen or been moved, but there had been no one else in the house. She glanced around, heart pounding as she scanned the kitchen and adjacent dining area. Nothing seemed out of place until she looked back at the table. There, in the very chair she'd sat in that morning, was the doll, slouched slightly forward as if it had been placed there in a hurry. She felt her blood run cold, her fingers clutching the edge of the counter as she tried to convince herself that it wasn't real. Had she left it in the dining room without remembering? She racked her brain for answers, certain she'd placed the doll in her closet hours earlier. But here it was, sitting upright with that familiar dark gaze fixated on her, seemingly unfazed by her confusion or her growing fear. Its expression seemed slightly altered, as if a shadow had passed over its delicate porcelain face, giving it a darker, more ominous look. Alina approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving the doll's face. The rational side of her brain argued that she must have forgotten where she left it, that stress or fatigue had made her overlook her own actions. But another, quieter part of her, the part that had sensed something wrong since she first stepped into the house, whispered a different theory. Perhaps the doll was somehow aware of her. Perhaps it was intentionally seeking her out, moving on its own, drawn to her in ways she couldn't understand. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the doll, feeling its cold, hard weight in her hands. "You're just a doll," she whispered, trying to steady herself. "Just an old, dusty doll." But as she held it, she felt a strange sense of resistance, as if it wanted to remain in the chair. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling, carrying the doll back to her bedroom. She placed it in a box, covering it with an old blanket, and shoved it under her bed, hoping that keeping it out of sight would also keep it out of her mind. She needed sleep, a break from the endless loop of fear that had been building since her arrival. But the night offered little solace. In the quiet of the house, as she lay in bed, she heard a faint scraping sound. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet persistent, like fingernails gently scraping against wood. Alina's heart pounded as she tried to pinpoint the source, her mind racing through possible explanations. The sound was coming from under her bed, from the box where she'd hidden the doll. She held her breath, unable to move, paralyzed by the mixture of fear and disbelief that gripped her. The scraping stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She wanted to check, to reassure herself that it was just her imagination, but the fear of what she might find kept her rooted in place. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a restless sleep filled with disturbing dreams. In her dreams, the doll appeared everywhere, following her through the house, standing silently in doorways, watching her with those unblinking eyes. When she woke the next morning, she was determined to put an end to this strange, haunting presence. She marched to her bed, pulled out the box, and found the doll exactly as she had left it, nestled under the blanket. She lifted it, looking into its eyes, half expecting it to blink or shift. But it was still lifeless, its expression as innocent and serene as ever. Alina decided to take the doll to the attic, hoping that if it were out of sight and out of reach, she could put the unsettling encounters behind her. She climbed the narrow staircase, carefully treading her way up to the dusty, cobweb-filled space. The attic was dimly lit, filled with old furniture, cardboard boxes, and relics from her grandmother's life. She placed the doll on a high shelf in the far corner, its face turned away from her. Closing the door behind her, she descended the stairs, feeling a sense of relief that she hoped would last. She busied herself with chores around the house, distracted enough to begin feeling normal again. But by evening, the quiet unease returned, gnawing at her like a splinter lodged deep in her mind. She tried to ignore it, focusing on anything but the doll, but it was as though the house itself had taken on a tense, expectant quality, as if something within its walls was holding its breath. As night fell, Alina felt an overwhelming urge to check the attic, to confirm the doll was still there, to put her mind at ease. She told herself it was ridiculous, that she was letting her imagination get the best of her. But the pull was undeniable, a strange compulsion that seemed to take hold of her. Finally, unable to resist, she climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, until she reached the attic door. She opened it slowly, peering into the dark space, her eyes scanning the shelves and boxes. The doll was gone, A wave of cold dread washed over her as she stepped into the attic, frantically searching every corner, every shadowed nook. There was no sign of it. She ran her hands over the shelf where she'd left it, her fingers brushing over an empty space that should have held the doll. Her mind raced with questions, but there was only one conclusion. Somehow, it had moved on its own. Terrified, Alina fled the attic, closing the door behind her and rushing down the stairs. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening, the logical part of her mind battling with the fear that had taken root. She checked every room, every corner, until finally she entered the living room and found it. There, sitting on the coffee table, was the doll. It was positioned upright, facing her, its eyes seeming darker, almost as though they were watching her with a strange awareness. The doll looked different. Its dress seemed more tattered, and there was a faint smudge on its cheek, almost like dirt. She stumbled backward, her mind reeling as she tried to process the impossible. Summoning every ounce of courage, Alina grabbed the doll, opened the front door, and hurled it outside, watching as it landed on the grass with a soft thud. She slammed the door shut, locking it, breathing heavily as she pressed her back against the door, hoping that this would be the end of it. But that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by dreams of the doll, each one more vivid and unsettling than the last. In her dreams, the doll was closer, reaching out to her, its cold porcelain fingers brushing against her skin. When she woke the next morning, her first thought was the doll. She hesitated, knowing what she would find but hoping, somehow, that it wouldn't be there. She opened her bedroom door, her gaze sweeping across the hallway and down the stairs. And there, at the bottom of the staircase, was the doll, sitting perfectly upright, its eyes fixated on her once more. As she stared down at it, a chilling realization settled over her. It wasn't just a doll. It was something far older, something that had been waiting, watching, perhaps even yearning for her presence. Alina's heart pounded as she stood at the top of the stairs, gazing down at the doll, which seemed to stare back up with an unsettling intensity. It was as if the porcelain face had changed subtly overnight, a shadow or smudge lending it an even more lifelike and sinister expression. The smooth, pale surface of its face now seemed more real, more aware, and the dark pupils in its eyes seemed to track her every movement. She forced herself to descend the stairs, each step feeling like an eternity. As she reached the bottom, she crouched down to look at the doll, her hand hovering just inches away. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer, explanations she couldn't rationalize. How was it possible that an inanimate object could move from place to place? Or worse, that it seemed to be watching her, waiting for something. She fought the urge to throw it away again, but knew, in some deep part of her mind, that it would inevitably return. This doll was beyond anything she'd encountered before, and she could feel its presence looming like a heavy shadow over her home. In an act of desperation, she placed the doll back in its box, covering it once again with the old blanket, and locked it inside a closet in the hallway. She closed the door with finality, telling herself that this time it would stay put. But the unease lingered, a creeping chill that clung to her, filling the air with an oppressive weight. Even as she walked away from the closet, she could feel the doll's presence behind the door, as if it were aware of her every movement. Over the next few days, Alina tried to live her life as normally as possible, but the doll occupied her every thought, casting a dark cloud over her mind. She went through her daily routine on autopilot, haunted by the sensation of unseen eyes following her around the house. Every creak, every slight noise felt amplified, like whispers echoing in her ears. She would turn abruptly, expecting to see the doll lurking in a corner, only to be met with empty space. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, that it was biding its time. One afternoon, Alina called a close friend, hoping to find solace or at least a rational explanation for what she was experiencing. Her friend, Maya, listened patiently as Alina recounted the eerie occurrences with the doll. There was a pause on the other end, and then Maya spoke, her tone cautious but supportive. "Alina, Are you sure you're not just stressed? Maybe this whole thing with your grandmother's house is bringing up old memories, and that doll is just a focal point for it, Maya suggested, though her voice betrayed a hint of doubt. Alina wanted to believe her friend, to convince herself that it was all just an overactive imagination at play. But deep down, she knew this was more than just stress or grief. There was something unnatural about the doll, a malevolent presence that defied logic or reason. Still, she nodded along, trying to take comfort in Maya's words, even if they rang hollow in her ears. That evening, Alina poured herself a glass of wine, hoping it would calm her nerves. She sat by the window, watching the fading light cast long shadows across the garden outside. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, to pretend that everything was normal. But just as she was about to take a sip, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound echoing from down the hall. She froze, the glass slipping slightly in her grip as her mind raced. The sound was coming from the closet where she'd locked the doll. Heart pounding, she rose from her chair, her footsteps hesitant as she approached the source of the noise. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if something were desperately trying to get out. Her hand shook as she reached for the doorknob, her breath hitching in her throat. She knew she should turn and run, call someone for help, or even leave the house altogether. But an inexplicable force seemed to compel her to open the door, to confront whatever lay behind it. She turned the knob slowly, the sound of the lock clicking open echoing ominously in the silence. As she opened the door, she was met with an empty closet. The box was exactly where she'd left it, the blanket undisturbed, the doll hidden from view. Yet the tapping had stopped the moment she'd unlocked the door, as if the presence within knew she was there, as if it were waiting for her. She reached down, her fingers trembling as she lifted the blanket. The doll's face was inches from her own, its eyes fixed on her with a terrifying intensity. It felt as though it had been watching her the entire time, lying in wait, biding its time. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest as she struggled to breathe. The doll's expression seemed to change, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of its mouth, as if it were mocking her fear. She backed away, closing the closet door and locking it once more. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion, her sense of reality slipping with each passing moment. She knew she had to do something to get rid of the doll once and for all. But deep down, she feared that no matter what she did, the doll would find its way back to her. Desperate, she decided to seek help from a local antique dealer who specialized in unusual artifacts. She loaded the doll into her car, feeling a strange sense of dread as she drove through the darkening streets. The dealer's shop was nestled on the edge of town, a small, dimly lit space filled with curiosities from around the world. As she entered, the smell of old wood and dust filled her nostrils, adding to the surreal, almost nightmarish quality of the situation. The dealer, an older man named Mr. Finch, eyed the doll with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Alina explained her experiences, her voice trembling as she recounted the strange events that had plagued her since the doll had entered her life. Mr. Finch listened in silence, his expression growing more grave with each word. When she finished, he regarded the doll for a long moment before speaking. "This is no ordinary doll," he said slowly, his gaze never leaving its porcelain face. "There are objects in this world that hold energy, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And this doll, I fear, may be one of those. It's as if it has a spirit attached to it, something that refuses to let go." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. "What should I do with it?" she asked, desperation evident in her voice. Mr. Finch shook his head. "There are rituals, methods to cleanse objects like these, but it's a delicate process. And sometimes, even that isn't enough. If the spirit is strong enough, it can cling to the object, follow its owner. But," he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper, "sometimes it can even find a new vessel." Alina's mind spun with the implications. She had hoped that bringing the doll to Mr. Finch would provide a solution, a way to rid herself of its dark presence. But his words left her with more questions than answers, a feeling of dread settling heavily in her chest. "I'll try to help you," Mr. Finch continued, "but it may take time. In the meantime, Keep it somewhere safe, somewhere it can't hurt you. He glanced at the doll once more, his expression one of deep concern. And whatever you do, don't let it out of your sight for too long. If it's left unattended, it may grow stronger, more determined. As she drove home, Alina felt a mixture of relief and terror. She had hoped to leave the doll with Mr. Finch, to let him deal with whatever dark energy was attached to it. But now, she understood that this wasn't a simple problem she could pass off to someone else. The doll was hers to deal with, and whatever spirit was bound to it seemed to have chosen her as its target. That night, Alina placed the doll in a glass case, locking it securely before setting it on a high shelf in her living room. She kept a wary eye on it, determined not to let it out of her sight. But as the hours ticked by, a strange exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch, her dreams filled with visions of the doll watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When she awoke in the early hours of the morning, the glass case was empty and the doll was gone. Alina's breath caught as she scanned the room, searching for any sign of the doll. The case sat ominously empty on the shelf, its glass door ajar. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat echoing the realization that she was no longer alone in the room. The doll could be anywhere, lurking in the shadows or hiding in a corner, and the possibility chilled her to the core. As she rose from the couch, her movements were slow, calculated, as though any sudden motion might draw the doll out from its hiding place. Her mind raced, trying to think logically about where it could have gone. She glanced at the hallway, the kitchen, even the stairs leading to the second floor. Every corner of the house seemed shrouded in darkness, filled with the unknown presence of the doll and its unsettling energy. Summoning her courage, Alina made her way to the hallway closet where she had first locked the doll. She knew it was irrational, but she had to start somewhere, and the closet felt like a significant point of reference. As she reached for the doorknob, her hand shook, the fear nearly paralyzing her. Slowly, she opened the door, holding her breath in anticipation. The closet was empty. She let out a sigh, though it brought her little comfort. Returning to the living room, she walked in a slow circle, her eyes sweeping over every surface, every shadow. The silence pressed down on her, thick and heavy, amplifying the faintest sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the house settling. But then, amidst the quiet, she heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping, like small fingers drumming on a hard surface. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Alina's legs felt rooted to the spot, fear making them feel heavy and unresponsive. She forced herself to move, one step at a time, edging toward the kitchen. As she crossed the threshold, the tapping grew louder, more distinct, as if whatever was making the noise knew she was there. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for the source of the sound. There on the countertop by the sink was the doll. It sat with its head tilted slightly, one hand raised as though it had been drumming its fingers on the counter. Its eyes, those glassy, piercing eyes, stared directly at her. The expression in its face twisted into something almost human, almost mocking. Alina's stomach churned, her entire body tensing with an instinctual need to flee. This time, however, she refused to run. She took a shaky breath, summoning every ounce of courage she could muster, and walked slowly toward the doll. She stopped just a foot away, her hand hovering above it as if testing to see if it would move again. But the doll remained still, its eerie expression unchanged. Alina spoke aloud, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The silence that followed felt deafening. She half expected the doll to respond, for its porcelain lips to twist into a cruel smile. But it stayed silent, a malevolent presence hiding behind a mask of stillness. In a desperate attempt to take control of the situation, Alina grabbed a towel and wrapped it around the doll, careful not to touch its cold, unyielding surface directly. The fabric muffled its unnerving stare, and for a brief moment, she felt a flicker of relief. But as she held it in her hands, the weight of it felt heavier than before, as though the spirit within had grown stronger, denser. With deliberate movements, she carried the doll to her basement, deciding that locking it somewhere far from her living space might help. The basement was dark and damp, a place she rarely went, but it seemed like the safest option to keep the doll out of sight and hopefully out of her life. She placed it on an old workbench, setting it down with a mixture of finality and dread. As she backed away, her eyes remained fixed on the doll, half expecting it to move or shift. She forced herself to turn, climbing the stairs and closing the basement door behind her. She even locked it, though she knew it would do little to keep whatever presence inhabited the doll from returning. The rest of the night was a blur of restless sleep and haunting nightmares. Images of the doll appeared in her dreams, its face twisted and malicious, its eyes boring into her soul. She woke several times, drenched in sweat, her mind gripped by a fear she couldn't shake. When dawn finally broke, Alina dragged herself out of bed, exhausted and haunted by the events of the previous night. She stumbled into the kitchen, the faint smell of coffee offering a small comfort as she tried to piece together her thoughts. But as she reached for the coffee pot, her hand froze midair. The doll was sitting on the kitchen counter, exactly where she had found it the night before. A cold wave of terror washed over her as she took a shaky step back. The doll had returned, breaking free from the basement, defying every measure she had taken to contain it. It was becoming clear to her that this wasn't a simple haunting. The doll was somehow bound to her, its presence unshakable, its power growing stronger with each passing day. Alina's mind raced, desperation clawing at her thoughts. She knew she couldn't keep going like this, living in constant fear and uncertainty. The doll was becoming bolder, its movements more frequent, as if it were testing her, wearing down her resolve. She needed help, someone who could guide her, offer answers. She thought back to her conversation with Mr. Finch, the antique dealer, and his cryptic warnings about the spirit bound to the doll. His words had lingered in her mind, filling her with a sense of foreboding. He had mentioned that some spirits could grow stronger, that they could even attach themselves to people. The thought filled her with dread, but she knew she had no other option. Summoning her remaining courage, she picked up her phone and dialed Mr. Finch's number. The phone rang a few times before his familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Finch, it's Alina. The doll is still here. It's moving on its own, and I don't know what to do. I need help," she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was a pause on the other end, and she could hear him sigh. "Alina, I warned you that this doll was dangerous, that it held something powerful. But if it's grown stronger, there may be no easy way to remove it from your life. This spirit, it may not want to leave." She swallowed hard, fear and frustration mingling within her. "Isn't there anything I can do? Any way to sever the connection?" Mr. Finch hesitated before speaking. "There are rituals, yes, but they are not without risk. A spirit as strong as this one could retaliate if it feels threatened. You must be prepared for the consequences." Despite her fear, Alina felt a surge of determination. She couldn't continue living under the doll's shadow, haunted by its presence. She had to try, no matter the cost. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. "Tell me what I need to do." Over the next hour, Mr. Finch guided her through the steps of the ritual. It involved items she would need to gather, words she would need to say, and most importantly, the unbreakable focus required to banish the spirit bound to the doll. The ritual had to be performed at midnight, under the light of a single candle, with no interruptions. Any lapse in concentration could be dangerous, he warned, as the spirit might seize the opportunity to tighten its hold on her. As she hung up, Alina felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve. She spent the day gathering the items she needed, a mixture of herbs, salt, and a small vial of holy water. By the time night fell, she was ready, the candle set up in the center of her living room, casting a flickering glow over the walls. She placed the doll in front of the candle, its lifeless eyes reflecting the flame in an unsettling way. Taking a deep breath, she began the ritual, reciting the words Mr. Finch had given her. Her voice was steady, but she could feel a presence in the room, a dark energy pressing down on her, testing her resolve. As she chanted, the air grew thick, charged with an unnatural tension. The candle flickered violently, and shadows seemed to dance across the walls, twisting and writhing. The doll's eyes seemed to narrow, as if it were aware of what she was trying to do, its face contorting with anger. Alina pressed on, her voice growing louder, more insistent, as she commanded the spirit to leave, to release its hold on the doll and her life. She felt a resistance, a force pushing back against her words, but she refused to falter. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the candle's flame went out, plunging the room into darkness. Alina froze, her heart pounding in the silence. For a moment, she thought she had failed, that the spirit had won. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed something strange. The doll lay motionless on the floor, its face twisted into an expression of pure fury, but its eyes were blank, lifeless. The oppressive feeling in the room had lifted, the dark energy dissipating into the night. For the first time in days, Alina felt a sense of peace, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The doll was still, its power broken, the spirit banished. As she sat back, exhausted but victorious, she knew that her ordeal was finally over. Or so she thought. Alina barely slept that night, exhaustion tugging at her as she drifted into a restless sleep filled with fragments of memories and fleeting images of the doll. For the first time since she'd brought it home, she felt relief, a sense of normalcy slipping back into her life. The morning light flooded through her windows, and for a brief moment, the world felt like her own again. She stayed in bed longer than usual, relishing the peace. The doll had remained in the living room where she'd left it, inert and lifeless as it should have been. She knew she would dispose of it soon, but the emotional toll of the previous night made the thought of handling it again almost unbearable. For now, she was content just to ignore it, if only for a little longer. Later, Alina finally mustered the energy to get up and begin her day. She started her routine with coffee, moving about her kitchen with a lightness she hadn't felt in days. The weight she had carried with her, the fear and tension, seemed to dissipate with each small, mundane task. She began to think she had finally regained control over her life. But as she sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her emails and sipping her coffee, a subtle unease crept back in. Something didn't feel right. She glanced around, searching for any signs of the doll, though she knew it was in the other room. Trying to shake off her paranoia, she turned her attention back to her inbox. Halfway through a message, she felt a chill skitter down her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she felt a presence, a faint sense of being watched. Slowly, she turned her head toward the living room. Her eyes fell upon the doorway, and though she couldn't see into the room from where she sat, she sensed something lurking just out of sight. Against her better judgment, she got up and walked cautiously to the living room doorway. She peered into the room, half expecting to find the doll on the floor where she'd left it after the ritual. But to her horror, it was no longer there. The empty spot on the floor where the doll should have been mocked her, filling her with a fresh surge of dread. The events of the previous night flashed through her mind, and a sick realization dawned on her. The spirit wasn't gone. If anything, it had grown more determined, more malevolent. Heart pounding, Alina backed away from the doorway, fighting the urge to panic. She searched the house, checking every corner, every shadowed space, but the doll was nowhere to be found. It was as if it had simply vanished. As she stood in the hallway, trying to make sense of everything, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The sudden sound made her jump, and she rushed over, glancing at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number, and the text filled her with a cold, crawling dread. "You can't get rid of me, Alina." Her hands shook as she read the message again, each word searing into her mind. It didn't make sense. The doll had never communicated this directly before, and the idea that it could somehow reach her through a phone was unthinkable. But then, after everything she'd experienced, was anything truly impossible? Alina's fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing. She could ignore it, pretend she hadn't seen it. But a part of her knew that ignoring this would only make things worse. With a sense of dread, she typed back, hoping against hope that there was some kind of logical explanation. "Who is this?" she sent, her heart pounding as she waited for a reply. The response came almost immediately. "I'm everywhere, Alina. You can't escape me." A shiver of terror ran through her as she read the words. It was the same sinister feeling she'd sensed since the doll had first moved, that dark, oppressive energy that seemed to cling to her, suffocating and unrelenting. In a panic, she dialed Mr. Finch's number, clutching the phone tightly as she waited for him to answer. After several rings, his familiar voice came through, sounding weary and concerned. "Alina," he asked, "what's happened?" "It's the doll," she replied, her voice trembling. It had sent me a message. There was a long pause on the other end, and Alina could almost picture Mr. Finch frowning in disbelief. "Sent you a message?" "Alina, spirits like this don't communicate in direct ways. They manifest through signs, through presence. They don't send messages." "But it did," she insisted, her desperation mounting. "I don't know how, but it did. I tried to banish it like you told me, but it's still here. It's stronger now." Mr. Finch's tone grew more serious. "Alina, if the ritual failed, it means the spirit is deeply bound to the doll, and possibly to you. There may be something within you that it's drawn to, a weakness it's feeding on. Spirits like this grow stronger when they sense fear, when they feel resistance." Alina closed her eyes, her mind spinning. The idea that the doll was somehow tied to her, that she might be fueling its power, was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't deny that her fear had been all-consuming, that every moment with the doll had chipped away at her strength. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was another pause before Mr. Finch replied, his voice heavy with reluctance. "You may need to confront it head-on, Alina. A direct confrontation may be the only way to sever the connection. But you must be careful. Spirits of this nature can be unpredictable, dangerous. If it feels threatened, it may try to harm you." Alina's heart sank, fear clawing at her insides. The idea of facing the doll, of confronting whatever malevolent force inhabited it, was terrifying. But she knew she had no other choice. It was either that, or live the rest of her life in fear, haunted by a presence that would never leave her alone. "I understand," she said, forcing herself to sound braver than she felt. "Tell me what I need to do." Mr. Finch gave her detailed instructions, his voice calm and steady. She would need a mirror, a candle, and a small vial of blessed oil. The ritual would be risky, but if done correctly, it could sever the bond between her and the spirit. However, he warned her to remain vigilant, as the spirit might attempt to resist, to fight back with everything it had. As she gathered the items, Alina felt a sense of grim determination settling over her. She knew this would be her final stand, her last attempt to rid herself of the doll and the terror it had brought into her life. As night fell, she sat alone in her living room, the mirror and candle placed carefully in front of her. The doll sat on the table, its empty eyes staring back at her, and she felt a chill as she looked into its blank, soulless face. Lighting the candle, Alina began the ritual, her voice steady as she repeated the words Mr. Finch had given her. She felt the atmosphere in the room shift, the air growing thick and heavy as the spirit's presence intensified. The doll's face seemed to contort, its expression twisting into one of rage, as if it sensed her defiance. Holding the mirror up to the doll, she watched as its reflection distorted, a dark shadow spreading across its face. The doll's eyes seemed to glow with a malevolent light, and a low, guttural sound filled the room, reverberating through her bones. Alina's hands shook, but she held her ground, refusing to back down. She could feel the spirit's anger, its desperation to hold on to her, but she forced herself to press on, to complete the ritual. The candle flickered wildly, the flame bending and twisting as though caught in a fierce wind. Just as she reached the final words, the room was plunged into darkness. The candle's flame had been snuffed out, and the air grew colder, filled with a tangible sense of malevolence. Alina froze, her heart pounding as she strained to see in the dark. A whisper filled the room, soft and chilling, as if it came from everywhere at once. "You can't escape me, Alina. You belong to me now." The words sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wouldn't let the spirit win, wouldn't let it claim her. She spoke the final words of the ritual, her voice strong and unwavering. For a moment, there was silence, a tense, suffocating stillness. Then, with a blinding flash, the candle relit itself, casting the room in a harsh, flickering light. The doll sat motionless, its face twisted into a grotesque expression of fury, its power broken. Alina collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling as relief washed over her. The presence was gone, the oppressive energy lifted, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. She had won, but as she stared at the doll, a flicker of doubt crept into her mind. She had seen its power, felt its strength. Could it really be gone? Or was this just another game, another trick? Only time would tell. Alina spent the following days cautiously optimistic, her world gradually returning to normal. She cleaned her apartment, erased every trace of the candle wax, the mirror, and the ritual's remnants. The doll remained in a sealed box, placed in a corner she rarely looked at, with layers of duct tape to secure it. She wasn't sure whether she should burn it, bury it, or throw it in the ocean, but the mere thought of handling it any further sent a wave of discomfort through her. But the peace was fragile. Despite her attempts to resume her routine, Alina couldn't shake a subtle, growing paranoia that nestled itself in the quietest corners of her mind. Every shadow, every unexpected sound, seemed magnified, pulling her attention and spiking her pulse. She told herself it was just the aftermath of her terrifying experience, that the mind had a way of clinging to trauma long after it had passed. One evening, as she prepared dinner, she felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She set her knife down, wiped her hands, and glanced at the screen. Her stomach dropped. It was another message from the same unknown number that had haunted her before. "I'm still here, Alina." A cold rush of dread washed over her, her mind racing to make sense of it. She read the words over and over, each time hoping she'd misread or imagined it. But the message was clear and real. She changed her phone number the day after the ritual, certain it would sever any strange connection that had manifested. Yet somehow, here it was again, reaching out to her through an unknown medium. Hands trembling, she stared at the message, a war raging within her. Part of her wanted to throw the phone, to deny any connection to the doll and its presence. But a deeper part of her, the part still bound to logic and reason, told her she needed to confront this. She replied with two simple words, hoping her defiance would weaken the spirit's hold. "What do you want?" Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a response. "You?" The implication sent a shiver through her. It wasn't after her possessions or even her soul, as she might have guessed. It was after her very being, her identity, her sense of safety and belonging. This wasn't just a haunted doll. It was something far more insidious, something that wanted to consume her life from the inside out. Determined to resist, she called Mr. Finch once more. This time, her voice was laced with equal parts terror and resolve. "It's not over, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice wavering. "The messages, they haven't stopped. It's still with me." A long pause followed, and then Mr. Finch's voice, sounding even older and wearier than before, spoke softly. "Alina, some spirits are relentless. They don't simply attach to objects. They attach to people. In such cases, destroying the item is sometimes the only option, but it is a path fraught with peril." Alina's heart sank. "What do you mean, peril?" "Spirits with such tenacity can become volatile when they sense they're losing control. If you destroy the doll, you may sever the last hold it has, but there is always a risk that it will retaliate, that its final act will be one of vengeance." Alina struggled with this thought, her pulse quickening. But she also knew she couldn't live in constant fear, trapped in a psychological cage built by this entity. "How would I go about destroying it?" "You'll need to burn it," he said slowly, carefully. "Completely. And you must be thorough. A single remnant left intact could allow the spirit to survive and manifest once more. If you choose this path, Alina, you must commit to it fully." She felt a surge of resolve, a fiery determination igniting in her chest. The fear had ruled her for long enough. She was ready to fight back. That night, she placed the doll in a metal trash can in her backyard, far from anything that could catch fire accidentally. She doused it in lighter fluid, struck a match, and watched as the flames engulfed the doll. The plastic melted and blackened, a toxic stench filling the air. Alina covered her nose and mouth with her sleeve, watching as the flames roared higher, seemingly defying logic as they leapt toward the sky. Shadows danced across her backyard, casting dark, eerie shapes against the walls. Her eyes stung from the smoke, but she kept watching, waiting until every trace of the doll had been reduced to ash. Just when she thought it was over, the flames shifted, and a strange, distorted face seemed to form within the fire. A grotesque image of the doll's face, its mouth twisted into an open scream of rage. Alina stumbled back, her heart racing, but she forced herself to stay, to bear witness until every last flicker of flame had died. Once the fire finally went out, she took a deep breath, the silence of the night settling heavily around her. She hoped, prayed, that this was truly the end. The following days were uneventful. She didn't receive any more messages. The house felt lighter, free from the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued her for so long. She dared to believe she had succeeded, that she'd finally reclaimed her life. But late one night, as she was drifting to sleep, she heard it, a faint, soft whisper coming from somewhere in her room. Alina! Her eyes shot open, her body tense, her heart pounding in her chest. She lay perfectly still, her ears straining to hear, but the room was silent once more. She told herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks on her. Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. Days turned into weeks, and Alina began to feel that normalcy was within reach again. She pushed aside the memory of the doll, the messages, and the strange occurrences as much as she could. Her mind convinced her that whatever remnants lingered were just echoes, a figment of her overactive imagination. But there was something she couldn't quite erase, the persistent whisper she'd heard that night. It had seeped into her dreams and made its way into the quietest corners of her mind, a faint but constant reminder of the ordeal she'd endured. Alina poured herself into work, filling her days with activities and tasks to drown out the lingering paranoia. She went out more often, met with friends, and did everything possible to make her house feel alive again. But there was one place she avoided, the antique store. As much as she tried to move forward, the idea of seeing Mr. Finch or setting foot near anything remotely connected to that doll was unthinkable. One Friday evening, after a long week, she received a call. She glanced at her phone, expecting it to be a friend, but the number was unfamiliar. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a local area code, one she vaguely recognized. Reluctantly, she answered, "Hello." The voice on the other end was hoarse and old, but familiar. "Alina," it croaked, sounding strained. "It's Mr. Finch." A chill ran down her spine, memories flooding back instantly. She hadn't heard from Mr. Finch since the night she burned the doll. "Mr. Finch?" she replied, a mixture of concern and fear in her voice. "Is everything okay?" There was a long, drawn-out silence before he replied, his voice trembling. I wanted to check on you. Something's been weighing on me." She could feel her heart pounding, her fingers trembling as she held the phone. "What is it?" "I've been seeing things, Alina," he whispered, his tone haunted. "Things that remind me of the object you brought to me." The fear in his voice made her stomach twist. It was as if a thin thread connecting her to the doll's curse hadn't fully snapped. She clenched her jaw, struggling to maintain composure. "Mr. Finch, I burned it. I watched it turn to ashes myself." Yes, I know you did," he said quickly, almost as if reassuring himself. "But I've come across certain signs. Things that make me believe that perhaps the spirit wasn't entirely bound to that doll. It might have," his voice cracked, his next words barely audible. "It might have attached itself to you." A wave of nausea washed over her. She closed her eyes, taking in slow breaths to steady herself. "What do you mean, attached to me?" I haven't felt anything since that night. Mr. Finch hesitated before continuing. Not all curses are tied to objects, Alina. Some spirits, particularly vengeful ones, can bind themselves to individuals. It's as if they're searching for a deeper connection, something to sustain them beyond a single vessel. Alina's pulse quickened. So, you're saying it's still with me? Watching me? There's a chance, he whispered, and I fear that as long as it's connected to you, it will find ways to make its presence known. Little disturbances growing until it's strong enough to show itself again. For a moment, Alina was paralyzed, the weight of his words crashing over her. The relief she'd felt, the sense of freedom, shattered like glass. What do I do? She finally managed, her voice a thin thread. Mr. Finch sighed, the sound heavy and defeated. There may be a way, but it's risky. You'll need to sever the connection on a personal level. A ritual of sorts, but one that doesn't involve the object. It's a purification, a cleansing of your own spirit, to sever the tie. Alina took a deep breath, her determination building. What do I need? He hesitated again, as if measuring his words carefully. You'll need a few items. A black candle, a mirror, salt, and something precious to you. Something with meaning. A mirror. The very thought made her skin crawl, bringing back memories of the dark ritual she'd done in her own home. But she knew she had no choice. She couldn't go on living under this shadow, haunted by something that wanted to claim her. And after I gather these things, place the mirror before you, he explained slowly, as if recounting an old memory. Circle it with salt, light the candle, and then look at yourself. Confront whatever you see. Speak to it. Tell it that you are cutting the ties that bind you. She swallowed, trying to shake off the rising dread. And that's it? He hesitated. The spirit may resist. It may try to frighten you, to make you doubt. But you must be strong. Only then will it truly leave. After the call, Alina gathered the items, the weight of Mr. Finch's warning settling heavily on her. She placed a small, hand-carved pendant, a gift from her late grandmother, in front of the mirror. It was her most cherished possession, a symbol of strength and love that she hoped would protect her. With a steady hand, she circled the mirror with salt, ensuring there were no gaps. She placed a black candle beside it and lit the wick, watching as the flame flickered and danced, casting long shadows across the room. Taking a deep breath, she sat before the mirror, forcing herself to meet her own gaze. For a moment, nothing happened. She stared into her reflection, feeling a strange sense of vulnerability, as if the mirror could see right through her. She took a deep breath, the candlelight casting eerie patterns across her face. Then, in a firm voice, she spoke aloud, feeling each word resonate within her. I break the connection. You have no power over me. I sever the ties that bind you to me. A cold breeze brushed against her face, sending a shiver down her spine. The candle flickered wildly, its flames stretching and bending as if in response to her words. Her reflection seemed to waver, her face taking on an almost unrecognizable quality, like a shadowy echo of herself. She clenched her fists, steadying herself. You have no hold on me. I release you. Leave me, now and forever. The room grew colder, a chill settling in her bones, as if something ancient and angry was stirring. Her reflection twisted, contorting into a grotesque mimicry of her face. Dark eyes stared back at her, filled with a malevolence that felt almost tangible. Leave me, she repeated, her voice trembling but resolute. The figure in the mirror sneered, its expression filled with rage, before it faded, dissolving like smoke in the air. The candle's flame shot high, flickered violently, and then went out. In the dark silence, Alina sat frozen, her heart pounding as she tried to process what had just happened. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight gone. She closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her, a final, definitive break from the entity that had tormented her. But just as she allowed herself to feel relief, a faint whisper reached her ears, barely audible, but unmistakable. I'm not done with you, Alina. Her eyes snapped open, the darkness around her feeling more oppressive than ever. Alina sat frozen, her breath hitching as the whisper echoed in her mind. It was as if the shadows themselves had come alive, swirling around her, taunting her with their very presence. The realization that whatever malevolent force had tormented her was not yet vanquished sent her heart racing. She fought the instinct to flee, forcing herself to stay rooted to her spot. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in around her, distorting the familiar lines of her surroundings. With determination building inside her, Alina rose, the weight of her fear clashing with her resolve. She had faced the darkness before and survived. This time, she would do the same. The mirror still loomed behind her, a dark portal reflecting not just her image, but the malevolent spirit that sought to reclaim its hold. She needed to confront it fully, to draw the battle line and declare once and for all that she would not be a vessel for its darkness. Gathering the remnants of her courage, Alina grabbed the black candle, relighting it with shaky hands. The flickering flame cast a ghostly glow in the dimly lit room, illuminating the corners that had felt like they were closing in on her. She placed the candle back before the mirror and leaned closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not afraid of you," she declared, her voice strong despite the tremor in her hands. "You've tormented me long enough. It's time for this to end." For a moment, the silence that followed was deafening. The shadows seemed to still, as if the very air held its breath. Then, a low chuckle echoed from the depths of the mirror, sending a chill racing down her spine. "You think you can sever what is eternal, little girl," the voice hissed, dripping with mockery. Alina swallowed hard, refusing to give in to the creeping dread. "You are not eternal. You are a fragment of darkness, and you will fade away." With each word, she felt the power of her own determination surge within her. "I will not be your host. I will not be your puppet." As she spoke, the candle flickered violently again, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The figure in the mirror writhed, distorting and morphing as it fought against her words. For a fleeting moment, Alina saw flashes of faces, distorted, anguished, lost souls bound to the darkness. They screamed silently, their mouths moving in a desperate plea for freedom. "Foolish child," the figure shrieked, its voice now a cacophony of anguished cries. "You are nothing. I will take what is mine." Alina's heart raced, the echo of their cries mingling with her own fear. But as she stared into the depths of the mirror, something deep within her sparked, an ember of hope igniting a fire of strength. She took a deep breath and stepped closer, the salt circle surrounding the mirror acting as her shield, her fortress against the encroaching darkness. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "I am not afraid of you. You have no power over me. I sever this bond now, and I will reclaim my life." The figure's distorted face twisted into a mask of rage, eyes blazing with fury. "You dare challenge me? I will consume you." As it lunged forward, Alina clutched her grandmother's pendant tightly in her hand. "No, I will protect myself," she screamed, raising the pendant toward the mirror as if it were a weapon. "You cannot touch me." A blinding light erupted from the pendant, illuminating the entire room and casting the shadows into retreat. Alina felt a warmth spread through her, a surge of energy as if the very essence of her grandmother's love and protection wrapped around her like an embrace. The dark figure recoiled, shrieking in fury as the light pushed it back into the depths of the mirror. "Enough!" Alina shouted, her voice booming as she held her ground. "You will not take me. I am stronger than you will ever know." With a final, desperate cry, she thrust the pendant toward the mirror, and in that moment, everything shifted. The light exploded outward, shattering the darkness as the figure's scream echoed through the room. The mirror cracked, fissures spreading like spiderwebs across its surface as the spirit within struggled against the force of her will. In a blinding flash, the mirror shattered completely, sending shards flying across the room. Alina shielded her eyes, feeling the rush of air as the darkness dissipated, leaving only the remnants of what had once been a powerful and vengeful spirit. As the last of the shadow evaporated into nothingness, the room fell silent. The only sound the gentle crackle of the remaining candle. Alina slowly lowered her hand, her heart pounding as the reality of what had just happened sank in. She stood in the aftermath, surrounded by shards of glass and the faint glow of candlelight. For a moment, she felt dizzy, the adrenaline coursing through her. Had she truly done it? Had she freed herself from the grip of the darkness that had haunted her? The answer came with the realization that the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had lingered for so long finally lifted. Alina took a deep breath, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over her. But as she glanced at the shattered mirror, a sliver of doubt crept into her mind. Was it truly over? Could she trust that the spirit was gone for good? The lingering echo of the figure's words haunted her, reminding her that the battle against darkness was not just external, but internal. With resolve returning, Alina began to gather the remnants of her shattered mirror, each piece a reminder of the struggle she had faced. She would not forget the lessons learned, the strength she had found within herself. As she cleared the space, she vowed to create a new beginning, one not overshadowed by fear, but filled with the light of her grandmother's love and courage. Yet deep within her, a question lingered. If the darkness had been so determined to cling to her, could it return? The remnants of that doubt echoed in the corners of her mind, whispering that while this chapter had closed, the story was far from over. As she prepared to move forward, she knew she would remain vigilant, ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the days following the confrontation with the darkness, Alina began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. The remnants of the shattered mirror were carefully swept away, replaced with bright flowers and photographs of happier times. Moments filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of family. She had hung her grandmother's pendant around her neck, a constant reminder of the strength that resided within her and the bond that could never be broken. Alina's mornings now began with light flooding through her window, casting away the shadows that had once lingered so ominously in her room. She immersed herself in the mundane yet comforting routines of daily life, finding solace in cooking, gardening, and spending time with friends who had supported her throughout her ordeal. But the experience had left its mark, a lingering awareness that something dark had once threatened her. One evening, Alina sat in her garden, the fragrance of blooming flowers surrounding her as she watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was a serene moment, one that would have seemed mundane before her encounter with the malevolent spirit. But now, it felt monumental, a testament to her survival and resilience. Yet, just as she began to lose herself in the beauty of the moment, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Alina's heart raced, instinctively bringing her gaze to the corner of her yard, where the shadows pooled beneath the old oak tree. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her strength. Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. Perhaps it was just the fading light. But the sensation of being watched washed over her, an all too familiar unease creeping into her chest. She shook her head, determined not to give in to fear. The darkness had been banished. She had made sure of it. Clenching her fists, she stood and walked toward the tree, the grass cool beneath her bare feet. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the flicker of doubt gnawing at her. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, but nothing else stirred. Just the whispering leaves, like a soft lullaby, soothing yet oddly unsettling. As she approached the base of the tree, she spotted something glinting among the roots, an object half buried in the soil. Kneeling down, she brushed away the dirt, revealing a small, ornate box. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings of vines and leaves winding around its edges. Curiosity piqued. Alina lifted it, feeling a strange energy emanating from it, as if it had been waiting for her to discover it. With a slight tremor in her hands, she opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, adorned with tiny charms, each one more beautiful than the last. But as she examined it, a chill ran down her spine. One of the charms resembled a miniature mirror, strikingly similar to the one she had shattered. The moment she touched it, an electric shock surged through her, sending her heart racing. A distant echo of laughter rang in her ears, familiar yet haunting. The sound sent her heart into a frenzy as she stood up quickly, the box slipping from her fingers and thudding against the grass. The laughter faded, but the eerie sensation of being watched returned, stronger than ever. Panic surged through her as she glanced around, but nothing had changed. The garden felt still, too still. Alina stepped back, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she couldn't leave the box behind. There was something vital about it, something she needed to understand. Taking a deep breath, she knelt to retrieve it, her resolve hardening. "I won't let you take control of my life again," she said aloud, her voice trembling but firm. "I've faced you once. I won't be afraid of you now." Closing her eyes, she concentrated on the bracelet, visualizing the strength she had drawn from her grandmother. The warmth of the pendant around her neck pulsed, reassuring her that she was not alone. The shadows swirled around her, but she stood her ground, channeling the power of light and love into the small box. Suddenly, she felt a shift, the energy around her vibrating with intensity. It was as if the spirits of the past were rallying around her, encouraging her to confront whatever malevolence still lingered. "Show yourself," she shouted into the darkness. "I am not afraid." A gust of wind whipped through the garden, and the shadows coalesced, forming the outline of a figure at the edge of the oak tree. Alina's heart raced, but she held her ground, the bracelet clenched tightly in her hand. "You are not welcome here," she called, her voice ringing with defiance. The figure shifted, revealing a face, familiar yet distorted, a reflection of her own fears. It was her, yet not her, eyes darkened and hollow, a twisted echo of the spirit she had faced before. "You think you can be rid of me? You think this is over?" It taunted, a mocking grin spreading across its face. "No!" Alina shouted back, drawing strength from the light she felt inside her. "You are nothing but a shadow of my fears, and I will not let you take control." With newfound resolve, she lifted the bracelet high, feeling the energy surging through her fingertips. "I embrace the light. You have no hold on me," she yelled, and with a powerful burst of energy, she hurled the bracelet toward the dark figure. As the charm flew through the air, it exploded with blinding light upon contact, illuminating the garden in a radiant glow. The figure recoiled, the mocking laughter turning into anguished screams as the light enveloped it, banishing the darkness back into the depths from which it had emerged. The air crackled with energy as the shadows dispersed, retreating like mist in the morning sun. Alina watched as the figure dissolved, its last echoes fading into the night. Silence returned to the garden, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Breathless, Alina fell to her knees, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. She had faced the darkness once more and emerged victorious. But she knew that this victory was only the beginning of her journey, a journey of healing, of reclaiming her life from the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. As she sat there, surrounded by the remnants of the battle she had fought, she felt the warmth of the sun on her face. The darkness was gone, but the lessons remained: strength, courage, and the unwavering belief that she could face anything that came her way. Alina rose, a new determination in her heart. She would honor her past and the struggle she had endured by living fully, by embracing the light and sharing it with others. The shadow of fear would no longer dictate her life. She was free to write her own story, one filled with hope, love, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she walked back toward her home, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the garden. It was a fresh start, a new chapter in her life, one that she would write with the strength of her experiences and the love of those who had always been by her side. The journey had changed her, but it had not broken her. And now, she was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in her power to conquer the darkness that had once threatened to take everything from her. With a final glance back at the oak tree, Alina smiled, her heart light with the promise of new beginnings. She was ready to move forward, unshackled from the shadows of her past, stepping into the light of her future. In the days following the confrontation with the darkness, Alina began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. The remnants of the shattered mirror were carefully swept away, replaced with bright flowers and photographs of happier times, moments filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of family. She had hung her grandmother's pendant around her neck, a constant reminder of the strength that resided within her and the bond that could never be broken. Alina's mornings now began with light flooding through her window, casting away the shadows that had once lingered so ominously in her room. She immersed herself in the mundane yet comforting routines of daily life, finding solace in cooking, gardening, and spending time with friends who had supported her throughout her ordeal. But the experience had left its mark, a lingering awareness that something dark had once threatened her. One evening, Alina sat in her garden, the fragrance of blooming flowers surrounding her as she watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was a serene moment, one that would have seemed mundane before her encounter with the malevolent spirit. But now, it felt monumental, a testament to her survival and resilience. Yet, just as she began to lose herself in the beauty of the moment, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Alina's heart raced, instinctively bringing her gaze to the corner of her yard, where the shadows pooled beneath the old oak tree. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her strength. Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. Perhaps it was just the fading light. But the sensation of being watched washed over her, an all too familiar unease creeping into her chest. She shook her head, determined not to give in to fear. The darkness had been banished. She had made sure of it. Clenching her fists, she stood and walked toward the tree, the grass cool beneath her bare feet. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the flicker of doubt gnawing at her. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, but nothing else stirred. Just the whispering leaves, like a soft lullaby, soothing yet oddly unsettling. As she approached the base of the tree, she spotted something glinting among the roots, an object half buried in the soil. Kneeling down, she brushed away the dirt, revealing a small, ornate box. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings of vines and leaves winding around its edges. Curiosity piqued, Alina lifted it, feeling a strange energy emanating from it, as if it had been waiting for her to discover it. With a slight tremor in her hands, she opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, adorned with tiny charms, each one more beautiful than the last. But as she examined it, a chill ran down her spine. One of the charms resembled a miniature mirror, strikingly similar to the one she had shattered. The moment she touched it, an electric shock surged through her, sending her heart racing. A distant echo of laughter rang in her ears, familiar yet haunting. The sound sent her heart into a frenzy as she stood up quickly, the box slipping from her fingers and thudding against the grass. The laughter faded, but the eerie sensation of being watched returned, stronger than ever. Panic surged through her as she glanced around, but nothing had changed. The garden felt still, too still. Alina stepped back, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she couldn't leave the box behind. There was something vital about it, something she needed to understand. Taking a deep breath, she knelt to retrieve it, her resolve hardening. "I won't let you take control of my life again," she said aloud, her voice trembling but firm. "I've faced you once. I won't be afraid of you now." Closing her eyes, she concentrated on the bracelet, visualizing the strength she had drawn from her grandmother. The warmth of the pendant around her neck pulsed, reassuring her that she was not alone. The shadows swirled around her, but she stood her ground, channeling the power of light and love into the small box. Suddenly, she felt a shift, the energy around her vibrating with intensity. It was as if the spirits of the past were rallying around her, encouraging her to confront whatever malevolence still lingered. "Show yourself," she shouted into the darkness. "I am not afraid." A gust of wind whipped through the garden, and the shadows coalesced, forming the outline of a figure at the edge of the oak tree. Alina's heart raced, but she held her ground, the bracelet clenched tightly in her hand. "You are not welcome here," she called, her voice ringing with defiance. The figure shifted, revealing a face, familiar yet distorted, a reflection of her own fears. It was her, yet not her, eyes darkened and hollow, a twisted echo of the spirit she had faced before. "You think you can be rid of me? You think this is over?" It taunted, a mocking grin spreading across its face. "No!" Alina shouted back, drawing strength from the light she felt inside her. "You are nothing but a shadow of my fears, and I will not let you take control." With newfound resolve, she lifted the bracelet high, feeling the energy surging through her fingertips. "I embrace the light. You have no hold on me," she yelled, and with a powerful burst of energy, she hurled the bracelet toward the dark figure. As the charm flew through the air, it exploded with blinding light upon contact, illuminating the garden in a radiant glow. The figure recoiled, the mocking laughter turning into anguished screams as the light enveloped it, banishing the darkness back into the depths from which it had emerged. The air crackled with energy as the shadows dispersed, retreating like mist in the morning sun. Alina watched as the figure dissolved, its last echoes fading into the night. Silence returned to the garden, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Breathless, Alina fell to her knees, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. She had faced the darkness once more and emerged victorious. But she knew that this victory was only the beginning of her journey, a journey of healing, of reclaiming her life from the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. As she sat there, surrounded by the remnants of the battle she had fought, she felt the warmth of the sun on her face. The darkness was gone, but the lessons remained: strength, courage, and the unwavering belief that she could face anything that came her way. Alina rose, a new determination in her heart. She would honor her past and the struggle she had endured by living fully, by embracing the light and sharing it with others. The shadow of fear would no longer dictate her life. She was free to write her own story, one filled with hope, love, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she walked back toward her home, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the garden. It was a fresh start, a new chapter in her life, one that she would write with the strength of her experiences and the love of those who had always been by her side. The journey had changed her, but it had not broken her, and now she was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in her power to conquer the darkness that had once threatened to take everything from her. With a final glance back at the oak tree, Alina smiled, her heart light with the promise of new beginnings. She was ready to move forward, unshackled from the shadows of her past, stepping into the light of her future. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. The dim light of dawn crept through the thin curtains of Emma's bedroom, casting soft shadows across the walls. The air was still and heavy, wrapped in a blanket of silence that only early mornings could bring. It was the kind of morning that felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic thoughts racing through Emma's mind. She had always been a light sleeper, and that night was no exception. The unease she felt lingered in the corners of her mind like a persistent fog. The previous day had been unusually taxing. Emma had been juggling work deadlines, family obligations, and the unease of a neighborhood disturbance that had been making headlines. A string of break-ins that had left many in her community feeling vulnerable. Even her usually vibrant neighborhood seemed subdued, the once bustling streets now echoing with whispers of fear and caution. That night, as she lay in bed, a shroud of anxiety settled over her, leading her to check the locks on her doors multiple times before finally drifting into a restless sleep. But now, as the sun began to rise, something felt off. Emma's senses tingled with an uncomfortable awareness, as if the atmosphere had shifted while she slept. She turned over, rubbing her eyes, and then froze. The bedroom door, which she distinctly remembered locking the night before, stood ajar, wide enough to allow a sliver of daylight to spill into the room. A chill ran down her spine. The door had never been left open. The feeling of dread began to blossom within her, an uncomfortable weight pressing against her chest. She sat up, her heart racing, listening intently for any sound that might indicate what had happened. Had she simply forgotten to lock it, or was something more sinister at play? Cautiously, Emma swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. Each heartbeat echoed in her ears, a frantic drum urging her to remain calm. She glanced at the door again, its ominous presence now a gaping portal into uncertainty. The room felt colder, as if the open door was inviting in a gust of wind that whispered secrets she didn't want to hear. With deliberate slowness, she approached the door. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had someone entered her home while she slept? Was this a result of the neighborhood break-ins? She gripped the door frame, her knuckles widening as she took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of panic. The hallway beyond her room was cloaked in shadows, the morning light barely reaching the far corners. Emma hesitated for a moment, straining to listen for any sounds, footsteps, voices, anything that could indicate she wasn't alone. But the house remained silent, almost too silent, as if it were holding its breath alongside her. Finally, she stepped into the hallway, her pulse quickening with each cautious footfall. The house was still, eerily so. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking just out of sight, yet nothing moved. It was as if the entire world had paused, watching her with bated breath. As she walked toward the stairs, she felt a sudden chill breeze through the open door. It sent shivers down her spine, and she wrapped her arms around herself, wishing for the warmth of her blankets. The staircase loomed ahead, its shadows deepening with each step she took. She paused at the top, staring down into the darkened abyss of the living room below. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling slightly. The word echoed back at her, bouncing off the walls and fading into silence. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, and she felt the urge to retreat back to the safety of her room. But she couldn't. She had to know. With a deep breath, Emma took the first step down. The old wood creaked beneath her weight, each sound amplified in the heavy stillness. She held onto the railing, every instinct urging her to turn back, yet her curiosity and fear propelled her forward. The living room came into view, bathed in the soft morning light. Everything appeared unchanged, yet the unease lingered in the air like a thick fog. She scanned the room for signs of intrusion, drawers slightly ajar, misplaced items, anything that would indicate a breach of her sanctuary. But there was nothing. The couch sat undisturbed, the coffee table neatly arranged. It was as if the world outside had forgotten her home existed. Just then, a distant sound, a soft, muffled thud, emanated from somewhere deeper within the house, causing her heart to leap into her throat. Emma froze, adrenaline flooding her veins. The sound had come from the kitchen. She squinted into the shadows, straining to hear any further indication of what might be lurking just beyond her line of sight. With every nerve on high alert, she tiptoed toward the kitchen, her breath hitching in her throat. The closer she got, the more she could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. What if someone was really in her house? As she reached the threshold of the kitchen, she paused, bracing herself for whatever lay beyond. The door to the kitchen was closed, yet the faint sound of something shifting echoed from within. "Who's there?" Emma called out, her voice steadier than she felt. No response, only silence, thick and suffocating. Taking a deep breath, Emma reached for the doorknob, her hand shaking slightly as she turned it. The door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. Her heart raced as she stepped inside, ready to confront whatever horror awaited her. To her surprise, the kitchen was empty. The morning sun streamed in through the window, illuminating every corner, leaving no room for shadows to hide. The coffee pot sat quietly on the counter, the last remnants of last night's brew still cooling in the carafe. It was the same familiar kitchen she had always known, yet an eerie sense of disquiet clung to the air. But then, her gaze fell on the floor, where a small object lay. Bending down to get a closer look, she gasped. It was a doll, a porcelain doll, one she had owned since childhood. Its eyes stared up at her, wide and lifeless, a faint smile painted across its face. Emma's breath quickened as memories flooded back to her. The doll had always been a source of comfort, a cherished item that had traveled with her through years of growth and change. Yet, seeing it here, out of place on the kitchen floor, sent a chill running through her. She couldn't recall taking it out of her bedroom. Had someone been in her room? Had they touched her belongings? Just as the questions began to swirl in her mind, she felt a presence behind her. A cold breeze brushed past her shoulder, and she instinctively turned. The door to the kitchen creaked slowly shut, leaving her feeling trapped. Emma's heart raced, panic setting in as the realization dawned on her. She was alone in the house, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. The shadows seemed to grow, elongating and twisting in the corners of her vision. "Hello," she called again, desperation creeping into her voice. This time, the silence felt heavy, oppressive, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Emma's mind raced, battling the urge to flee back upstairs. Instead, she took a step toward the door, her fingers curling around the handle. But before she could make her escape, a loud bang echoed from the living room, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Emma's heart dropped as she stood frozen in place. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and the cold grip of fear tightened around her throat. The footsteps grew closer, heavy and deliberate, sending her heart racing. There was no one in sight, but she could feel the energy in the room shift, the air thickening with anticipation. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Emma stood at the threshold of the kitchen, her heart pounding in her ears. She had a decision to make: stay and face whatever was happening, or run and seek safety. With a deep breath, she made her choice. "Show yourself," she yelled, her voice stronger than she felt. The silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the house was challenging her. Emma felt the weight of the moment settle around her, a palpable energy crackling in the space. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A shadow flitting past the window, a fleeting glimpse of something that sent her heart racing. "Who's there?" she demanded again, her voice firm, yet trembling. As if in response, the kitchen lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature dropped even further, a bone-chilling breeze whipping through the room, sending Emma's heart into overdrive. Panic surged within her, and she turned to flee. But before she could take a step, the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in the kitchen. Emma gasped, her heart racing as she pressed her back against the counter, desperately searching for an escape. The footsteps returned, but now they echoed from behind her, the sound growing louder, more insistent. Emma's breath quickened as she turned, facing the darkness behind her. The kitchen felt like a cage, and she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Just then, the porcelain doll caught her eye again, its unblinking gaze seeming to follow her every move. With a surge of determination, Emma decided she wouldn't be a victim of fear. She refused to let whatever lurked in the shadows dictate her actions any longer. Clenching her fists, she steeled herself against the mounting terror that threatened to overwhelm her. "Whoever you are, I'm not afraid of you," she shouted, her voice resonating with newfound confidence. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. The lights flickered once more, but instead of retreating, she stepped forward toward the source of the shadows. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the presence that felt so close yet remained hidden. As she moved closer to the doorway, she heard the faint sound of laughter, soft and haunting. It echoed around her, curling around her ears like smoke. Emma's heart raced as she scanned the room for the source, her mind reeling with possibilities. Was it a figment of her imagination, or was something truly watching her? Suddenly, the laughter stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost deafening. Emma took a deep breath, her instincts telling her that she needed to confront whatever was in her house. She refused to back down. "Come out and face me," she demanded again, her voice unwavering. With a surge of courage, Emma rushed toward the door, grasping the handle with both hands. She twisted it, only to find it locked tight. Panic surged through her, but she fought it back. There had to be a way out. Thinking quickly, she looked around for something to use. The kitchen was filled with various utensils, and her gaze fell on a heavy cast iron skillet hanging from a hook on the wall. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, feeling its reassuring weight in her hands. "Show yourself," she shouted once more, brandishing the skillet as if it were a weapon. Just then, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a split second before illuminating again. Emma squinted, her heart racing as she scanned the shadows. In that brief moment of darkness, she thought she saw a figure standing just beyond the doorway, tall and slender, shrouded in darkness. "Get away from me," she yelled, stepping back as the figure seemed to shift, disappearing into the shadows again. The lights flickered once more, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Emma's breath quickened, and she felt the cold sweat trickle down her back as she steadied her grip on the skillet. In the dim light, she finally caught sight of the doll again. Its expression seemingly changed, a sinister grin stretching across its porcelain face. Emma shivered, realizing that the doll had been a part of her life for so long, but it felt like a curse now. The memories flooded back, playing with it as a child, creating elaborate stories around it. But now, it felt like a connection to something dark, something malevolent. Before she could process her thoughts further, the door creaked open slightly, revealing the hallway beyond. She could hear faint whispers now, words she couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakably mocking. Emma's heart raced. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but she felt rooted in place. She took a step toward the door, ready to confront whatever lay beyond. But just then, the doll fell off the counter with a soft thud, its head cracking against the tile floor. Emma gasped, her heart nearly stopping as she crouched down to pick it up. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she held the doll close. The house felt alive around her, its very walls pulsing with an energy she could not comprehend. She turned back to the hallway, ready to leave the kitchen behind, but the air shifted again, heavier this time. A cold breeze swept through the space, extinguishing the light overhead, leaving her in darkness. "Please," she pleaded, "I just want to understand." At that moment, the whispers intensified, echoing through the darkness, swirling around her like a storm. Emma's grip tightened around the doll, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. Just as quickly as it had darkened, the light flickered back to life, illuminating the kitchen once more. But Emma gasped at what she saw. A figure standing at the threshold of the kitchen, a shadowy outline with no discernible features. The air grew thick with fear, and she could feel the temperature drop even further. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling yet firm. The figure did not respond, but she could feel its presence looming closer, a suffocating energy pressing against her. Emma's heart raced as she backed away, seeking the counter for support. "Stay away from me," she shouted, brandishing the skillet again. But the figure simply stood there, its silence amplifying the tension in the room. Emma's mind raced, searching for any rational explanation. Could this be a trick of the mind, a manifestation of her fears? Or was this something far more sinister? With resolve, she stepped forward again, willing herself to confront the darkness. "You don't scare me," she declared, her voice ringing with determination. "I will not be a victim." The figure remained still, and for a moment, she thought she could see a flicker of movement within the shadow. But just as quickly as she spotted it, the figure dissolved into darkness, fading back into the shadows of the hallway. Emma stood there, her breath coming in rapid bursts, the echoes of her pounding heart drowning out the eerie silence. She felt a strange mix of fear and defiance. She had stood her ground, but what would come next? Then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the doll again. It lay there, its porcelain face cracked, but something had changed. Instead of its innocent smile, it now wore a grimace, as if mocking her efforts. "Enough of this!" Emma shouted, losing her composure as she hurled the doll across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crash, and for a moment, the room felt alive with energy. But instead of relief, a dark shadow seemed to seep from the doll's broken form, swirling around the room like a tempest. Emma stumbled back, her mind racing as the whispers grew louder, an ominous chorus chanting her name. In that moment, she realized the truth. This was not just about her fears or a simple disturbance in her home. This was something far more profound, something connected to the very essence of the doll itself. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice raw with panic as she backed away, searching for an escape. But as she turned to run, the door slammed shut again, sealing her inside the kitchen. The darkness enveloped her, and the whispers crescendoed into a chaotic symphony of voices. Emma felt the energy pulse around her, pressing in from all sides. She was trapped, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, but she refused to surrender. Summoning every ounce of courage she could muster, she shouted into the darkness, "I will not be afraid. You have no power over me." The energy swirled, and the voices erupted into a cacophony of sound, echoing her defiance. Emma felt her heart racing, but she stood firm, determined to break free from this nightmare. With a sudden rush of clarity, she dashed toward the kitchen window, hoping to escape into the outside world. As she reached it, she threw it open, the cool morning air rushing in like a balm. The whispers faltered, and for a fleeting moment, silence filled the room. Emma clambered through the window, desperate to break free from the oppressive energy that had surrounded her. As she landed outside, she took a moment to catch her breath, her heart racing as she looked back at the house. The kitchen window remained open, the darkness still swirling within, but she was finally free. But as she turned to run down the street, she felt a chill creep up her spine. Something was still watching her, lurking in the shadows of her own home. She could feel its presence, an unseen force that would not let her go so easily. And so began the terrifying chapter of her life, where the boundaries of reality blurred, and the whispers of the past continued to haunt her every move. Emma knew this was only the beginning, and she had to confront the darkness that threatened to engulf her once more. This horrifying incident had marked a turning point, one that would lead her deeper into a web of mystery and fear than she could have ever imagined. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees lining the street, casting dappled shadows on the pavement as Emma fled from her house. The morning air was brisk, but the chill that had settled in her bones from the night before refused to dissipate. Her heart raced as she pushed forward, each step taking her further away from the oppressive weight of her home and the darkness that lingered within. She hurried to her friend Mia's house, the only person she felt she could confide in after the events of the previous night. As she approached the familiar blue door, Emma's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. How could she explain the inexplicable? What words could capture the terror she had felt? Mia opened the door with a bright smile that quickly faded into concern as she took in Emma's disheveled appearance. "Emma, what's wrong?" she asked, ushering her friend inside. Emma stepped over the threshold, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her as she entered the cozy living room filled with the comforting scents of cinnamon and vanilla. I don't know how to say this, but something is happening in my house," Emma stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia's brow furrowed as she led Emma to the couch. "Just take a deep breath. Start from the beginning." As Emma recounted the events of the previous night, the inexplicable opening of her bedroom door, the unsettling presence she felt, and the doll that had seemingly come to life, Mia listened intently, her eyes widening with each revelation. "You're saying the doll is moving? That's insane!" Mia exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. Emma nodded, her hands trembling. "I thought I was just being paranoid, but when I woke up to find my door wide open, I knew something was wrong. I could feel that something was watching me." Mia leaned closer, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Have you thought about doing some research? Maybe there's something in your house's history?" Emma sighed, running her fingers through her hair in frustration. "I don't know where to even start. It feels like I'm going crazy." "You're not crazy, Emma," Mia reassured her. "But maybe you should look into the doll. Did you get it from someone? Is there a story behind it?" That suggestion sparked a flicker of hope in Emma. She had always been fascinated by the history of objects, the stories they carried, and the memories they held. "You're right. I need to know more." As they sat in Mia's living room, Emma felt the shadows of doubt begin to lift, replaced by a determination to uncover the truth behind the doll. But as the day wore on, a nagging sense of foreboding crept back into her mind. Later that evening, as Emma returned home, she found herself standing outside her front door, anxiety twisting in her stomach. The sky was painted with hues of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over her house. The memory of the previous night flooded her thoughts, and she hesitated before stepping inside. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing in the stillness. The familiar scent of her home surrounded her, but now it felt tainted, as if it were infused with an unseen presence. Emma flicked on the lights, illuminating the living room. Everything appeared normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The doll sat on the shelf, perfectly still, its cracked porcelain face glistening under the light. Just a doll, she muttered to herself, attempting to dispel the growing tension. As she moved through the house, she found solace in the mundane tasks of setting down her bag and preparing a simple dinner. But the comfort was short-lived. The shadows cast by the dim light seemed to stretch and shift, creeping closer as if they were alive. The hours passed slowly, and the night deepened around her. Emma finished her dinner, but the sense of unease settled back in, like a heavy blanket draped over her shoulders. She decided to distract herself with some television, hoping to drown out her thoughts. As she sank into the couch, the familiar glow of the screen provided a momentary reprieve from her fears. But just as she began to relax, a sound shattered the silence, a soft creaking, as if someone was walking across the wooden floor. Emma's heart stopped. She turned off the television, the sudden darkness amplifying every sound in the house. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate, echoing from the hallway leading to her bedroom. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Emma swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She knew she should stay put, but her curiosity got the better of her. With cautious steps, she moved toward the hallway, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a drum in the quiet. She reached her bedroom door and hesitated for a moment, the memory of the door swinging open the previous night fresh in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was bathed in moonlight, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. The doll was back on her bed, positioned as if it had been waiting for her return. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous," Emma muttered, shaking her head. "I need to stop letting this get to me." But just as she turned to leave, the room grew colder. A chill swept through the air, and she felt a prickling sensation on her skin. Emma's heart raced as she turned back to the doll, her eyes narrowing. It was no longer in the same position she had left it in. The doll's head was tilted slightly to the side, as if it were observing her. "Stop it," she said firmly, though her voice quivered. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and for a brief moment, Emma felt an inexplicable urge to approach the doll. She took a tentative step forward, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. But then, a loud bang resounded from downstairs, causing her to jump. The sound was unmistakable, a door slamming shut. Emma's heart raced anew, and she dashed to the hallway, looking over the railing to see if anyone was there. The house was silent again, but she could have sworn she saw a flicker of movement in the shadows below. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaky. There was no answer, just the oppressive stillness of the night. Gathering her courage, Emma descended the stairs, gripping the railing tightly. With each step, the creaking of the wood echoed in the quiet, amplifying her anxiety. As she reached the bottom, she scanned the living room, but there was no sign of intruders. The front door stood wide open, a chilling breeze swirling through the house. "Why is this happening?" she whispered to herself, the fear clawing at her insides. She moved toward the door, peering out into the darkness. The street was deserted, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. Just as she was about to close the door, she heard it again, the laughter. It was soft, melodic, yet laced with malice. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back, her heart racing. The laughter echoed through the stillness, taunting her. She slammed the door shut, locking it tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it just her imagination? Was she losing her grip on reality? But deep down, she knew there was something more sinister at play. The doll, the laughter, the presence that lingered in her home. They were all connected, and she needed to uncover the truth before it consumed her entirely. As she retreated to the safety of her bedroom, she felt the weight of the darkness pressing in around her. But this time, she wouldn't hide. She would confront the shadows, armed with the knowledge that she was not alone in this fight. Determined to take back control, Emma sat down at her desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she began her research. She would find the origins of the doll, its history, and the secrets hidden within its porcelain facade. With every click of the mouse, she could feel the shadows retreating, if only slightly. Emma was ready to delve deeper into the mystery, to face whatever it was that had taken hold of her life. Little did she know, the answer she sought would lead her down a path more terrifying than she could ever imagine. As the darkness deepened outside, Emma's resolve hardened within. With her laptop illuminated in the dim light of her bedroom, she felt an odd sense of determination amidst her fear. She typed in the search bar, haunted dolls, cursed objects, and mysterious occurrences related to dolls. Each click seemed to echo with her heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder that she was diving headfirst into the unknown. The search results flooded her screen, revealing a myriad of stories, some unsettling, some outright terrifying. Tales of haunted dolls that moved on their own, legends of cursed artifacts bringing misfortune to their owners, and accounts of others who had felt a similar presence in their homes. Each article she read heightened her awareness of her situation, intertwining her own experiences with those of others. A particular story caught her eye. It detailed a doll named Annabelle, infamous for its sinister reputation. According to the account, the doll was said to be possessed by a malevolent spirit, leaving a trail of chaos in its wake. The mere thought sent shivers down Emma's spine, but there was something deeper, a strange kinship with the fear described within those pages. She leaned closer to the screen, scanning the text for any clues that could connect back to her own experiences. A paragraph caught her attention. Many owners of haunted dolls report a feeling of being watched, disorientation, and instances of the doll changing position when unobserved. Emma's heart raced. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were shared experiences. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she took notes, outlining the behaviors of haunted dolls and potential ways to confront them. But as she read deeper, she stumbled upon something darker, warnings from people who had tried to rid themselves of these cursed objects. The advice was clear. Do not confront the spirit without understanding its intentions. It may lead to dire consequences. A chill swept through the room, and the air felt heavy with unspoken threats. Emma couldn't help but feel that she was standing on the precipice of something terrifying. She had to know more about the doll she had inherited, its origin, and the history of its previous owners. With a deep breath, she continued her research, diving into the specific details surrounding her doll. She typed in the name of the antique shop where she had found it, Curiosities and Oddities. The shop had been tucked away in a forgotten corner of town, a place filled with strange artifacts and odd memorabilia. After sifting through a few pages, she finally found a mention of the shop in an old forum dedicated to the paranormal. A user had posted a story about a haunted doll they had purchased from there years ago, describing how the doll had moved in its sleep and how its eyes seemed to follow them. Emma's heart raced with curiosity and dread. Could it be that her doll was connected to this history? She quickly made a note of the user's name and the date they claimed to have purchased the doll. A wave of adrenaline coursed through her as she realized that she had a lead. But as she continued her search, something else began to feel amiss. The shadows in her room appeared to be lengthening, creeping closer as if they were alive. Each glance towards the door sent a pang of fear through her, reminding her of that night when it had swung open without warning. "Get a grip, Emma," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She stood up, stretching her legs and walking toward the window. She needed to clear her head. As she opened the curtains, the moonlight flooded the room, casting a silvery glow on everything within. The street was quiet, and for a moment, The stillness calmed her racing heart. But just as she turned to step away, something caught her eye, a flicker of movement near the doll. She froze, her breath hitching in her throat. The doll had shifted ever so slightly, its head now angled in a way that seemed to direct its gaze straight at her. "Okay, this is insane," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the thudding of her heart. Determined to confront her fears, she approached the doll, every instinct urging her to turn away. "You're just a doll, just a piece of porcelain," she said, but her words felt hollow as they echoed in the quiet room. With shaky hands, she reached out, brushing her fingers against its cold, smooth surface. A wave of icy energy coursed through her, causing her to withdraw her hand quickly. She took a step back, uncertainty gnawing at her. "No, this is ridiculous. You're not real," she said firmly, though the doubt crept into her voice. Just then, her phone buzzed on the desk, startling her out of her reverie. It was Mia, texting her to check in. Emma quickly replied, her fingers racing over the screen as she recounted her findings, detailing the connection to the antique shop and the forum post. "Maybe we should go to the shop tomorrow?" Mia texted back. "We can ask about the doll's history together." Emma felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Having Mia by her side would make facing the fear much easier. "Yes, definitely," she typed back. As she set her phone down, she glanced back at the doll. It sat there, unmoving, but something about its presence felt more sinister than before. Taking a deep breath, Emma steeled herself for the night ahead. She needed to prepare for tomorrow, to face whatever was waiting for her at the shop. She returned to her desk and began drafting a list of questions for the shopkeeper, focusing on the doll's past and any known incidents related to it. But the deeper she delved into her research, the more unsettling the information became. The stories she found were filled with warnings and dark outcomes. People who had ignored the signs often faced dire consequences, strange accidents, loss of loved ones, or an unshakable sense of dread. As the clock struck midnight, Emma felt exhaustion settle over her. Yet sleep was a distant thought, overshadowed by the lurking fear that haunted her. She turned off her laptop and moved to the bed, glancing at the doll one last time. "I'll get to the bottom of this," she promised herself before pulling the covers tightly around her. But as she lay in the darkness, her mind raced with scenarios. What if she uncovered something terrible? What if the doll was indeed cursed? As sleep finally began to take hold, her thoughts spiraled into a haze, merging with the shadows that danced across her walls. Emma's dreams were filled with fragmented images, the doll's piercing gaze, the echo of laughter, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. And then, just as she felt herself drifting into deeper sleep, she heard it again, the creaking of her bedroom door. Startled awake, Emma's eyes flew open. The moonlight flooded her room, illuminating the space. But her door was ajar, swinging gently as if someone had just stepped through. A sense of dread washed over her as she realized that whatever was haunting her was growing bolder. "Not again," she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. With her mind racing and her pulse quickening, she prepared to confront the darkness that loomed just beyond her door. Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she lay frozen beneath the covers, staring wide-eyed at her partially open bedroom door. The eerie silence hung in the air, thick with the promise of something unsettling. With each creak of the door, she felt the weight of fear pressing down on her, suffocating yet oddly electrifying. Was she truly alone, or was something lurking just beyond the threshold, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Gathering her courage, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cold floor sending a jolt through her body. She could no longer hide from the reality that her home had become a stage for an unseen horror. With tentative steps, she approached the door, the floorboards creaking under her weight as if whispering warnings of the dangers that lay ahead. Peeking through the gap, she felt a rush of adrenaline. The hallway was dark, the shadows pooling in the corners like ink blots, but there were no signs of movement. The house felt eerily still, amplifying the unsettling sense that she was being watched. "Just a draft," she whispered to herself, trying to rationalize the situation. "It's just the wind. But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. With a deep breath, Emma stepped out of her bedroom, her bare feet silent against the cool wooden floor. The hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by the soft glow of a night light at the far end. As she moved cautiously, she couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow was alive, watching her, waiting. Her pulse quickened as she reached the end of the hall, the source of the eerie creaking sound now apparent. Her front door stood wide open, the cold night air spilling into the house, chilling her to the bone. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic crashing over her. "What the hell?" she muttered, her voice trembling. Had she left the door open? She distinctly remembered locking it before heading to bed. Yet there it was, inviting the darkness in. Taking a few hesitant steps toward the door, she peered outside into the night. The street was bathed in the silver glow of the moon, but it was empty, eerily quiet. The world outside felt different, strange, almost too still. No rustling leaves, no distant cars, just the unnerving silence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heart. A shiver danced down her spine as she turned her gaze back into the house, searching for anything out of the ordinary. The faint outlines of her living room and kitchen loomed in the dim light, but nothing seemed to miss. Yet the oppressive atmosphere felt thick, charged with a sense of foreboding. Stepping back, Emma contemplated her next move. Part of her wanted to slam the door shut, to retreat back to the safety of her room. But the other part, the part driven by curiosity and fear, urged her to investigate further. Her gaze flicked back to the doll, still sitting innocently on her bed. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. It was time to confront the source of her nightmares. If the doll was the catalyst for her growing fear, then perhaps facing it directly was the only way to regain control over her life. She quickly returned to her bedroom, the doll staring at her with its vacant eyes. It felt like a confrontation, a battle of wills between her and this porcelain figure that had haunted her waking hours. "Why are you doing this?" she asked the doll, her voice trembling with frustration. "What do you want from me?" The doll remained silent, its expression frozen in a perpetual smile that now felt sinister. Emma's heart raced as she felt a mix of anger and fear coursing through her. "I'm not afraid of you," she shouted, the sound reverberating through the room. But inside, she was terrified. Terrified of the unknown, terrified of the darkness that seemed to envelop her life. Just then, her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Mia, asking if she was okay and reminding her about their plan to visit the antique shop later that day. "I need you," Emma typed back, her fingers moving quickly. "I think something is really wrong here. Can you come over?" Mia responded almost immediately. "On my way. Just hang tight." As she set her phone down, Emma took a deep breath, attempting to calm her racing heart. She paced the room, trying to collect her thoughts. What was she going to say to Mia? How could she explain the growing sense of dread that had taken root in her life? The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she waited. Each creak of the house seemed amplified, and the shadows in her room grew longer, twisting and contorting like dark fingers reaching for her. She glanced at the doll once more, its eyes seeming to glint with malice. A sudden realization struck her. The doll had moved since she first brought it home. Was it somehow connected to her fears? Was it aware of her dread? The thought sent chills racing down her spine. Then, a knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. "Emma!" Mia called from the other side. Relief washed over her as she rushed to open it. Mia stood there, a concerned expression on her face, her eyes darting around the dimly lit room. "What's going on?" "You look pale," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I don't know how to explain it," Emma stammered, her hands wringing together nervously. "It's the doll. I think it's causing everything that's happening." Mia raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident on her face. "The doll? You mean the one from the antique shop?" "Yes," Emma exclaimed, feeling a wave of desperation wash over her. "It's moving. I heard the door open last night. It felt like something was in the house with me." Mia's expression softened, but her brow furrowed in concern. "Okay, let's take a look at it. You know I believe you, but we need to figure this out logically." They returned to Emma's room, and Emma pointed to the doll, which still sat on the bed, its vacant smile taunting her. As they approached, Mia knelt down, examining the doll closely. "It looks old," she mused, "but that doesn't mean it's haunted. People can get attached to things and let their imaginations run wild." Emma's frustration bubbled to the surface. "This isn't just my imagination, Mia. I can feel something. It's like a presence in the house." Mia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, let's test it. If it's just a doll, then nothing will happen, right? But if it is moving, well, that's a different story." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, intrigued yet apprehensive. "We can try setting up a camera," Mia suggested. "If it moves, we'll have proof. If it doesn't, maybe we can find a more rational explanation." Emma nodded, the idea resonating with her desire for answers. "Let's do it," she agreed, feeling a surge of hope. They quickly set up Mia's camera on a tripod facing the bed, ensuring that the doll was in the frame. Emma's pulse quickened with a mix of anticipation and dread as they stepped back. "What now?" she whispered. "Now we wait," Mia replied, her expression serious. As the minutes ticked by, they sat in silence, watching the doll intently. Time stretched on, and every second felt like an eternity. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the opportune moment to reveal itself. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mia asked after a while, breaking the stillness. "Not really," Emma confessed, "but I need to know what's going on. I can't keep living like this." The tension hung thick in the air, and just when Emma felt her resolve wavering, Mia's phone buzzed, breaking the silence once again. "Hey, it's just my mom," Mia said, glancing at her screen. "I'll be right back." As Mia stepped out of the room, Emma's gaze remained fixed on the doll. She felt an overwhelming urge to approach it, to touch it again. As she took a step closer, the room felt charged with energy, an almost electric sensation in the air. Just as she reached out her hand, she heard it, soft, barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Emma!" The voice sent a bolt of ice through her veins. She froze, heart racing, staring wide-eyed at the doll. The world around her faded, and all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing, heavy and panicked. "Emma!" The whisper came again, this time clearer, laced with a chilling familiarity that sent waves of fear crashing over her. "Who's there?" she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence enveloped her, thick and suffocating. She stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to flee. And then, as if in response to her fear, the doll's head slowly turned, its eyes locking onto hers, an unsettling smile stretching across its porcelain face. "Emma," it whispered once more, sending her into a full-blown panic. Before she could react, Mia returned, her expression shifting from concern to shock as she took in the scene. "Emma, what's wrong? Did you hear that?" Emma stammered, backing away, her eyes never leaving the doll. "What are you talking about?" Mia asked, her brow furrowed. "The voice. It spoke to me." Mia looked between her and the doll, disbelief written all over her face. "You're scaring me, Em? Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm not crazy." It spoke. But before they could discuss it further, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before coming back on. The atmosphere shifted, a heavy weight pressing down on them, amplifying the sense of dread. "Did you see that?" Mia gasped, glancing around the room. "Something's not right," Emma whispered, fear creeping into her voice. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that was palpable, as if the very walls were holding their breath. They exchanged a worried glance, and Emma knew deep down that whatever was happening, it was far from over. The night was just beginning, and the truth behind the doll, and the terror it brought, was waiting to be uncovered. As the reality of their situation began to sink in, Emma and Mia exchanged tense glances, both grappling with the shadows of fear that loomed over them. The flickering lights had thrown the room into disarray, casting distorted shapes that danced along the walls like the memories of their childhood fears. Emma's heart raced as she desperately sought a rational explanation for the unsettling events unfolding around them. Maybe we should just get rid of the doll, Mia suggested, her voice wavering slightly. If it's causing all this, we don't need it anymore. No, Emma replied quickly, a surge of protectiveness washing over her. I can't just throw it away. It's a part of this now. It's the only way to understand what's happening. Mia nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Emma's words, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Okay, then what's our next move? We need to figure out what that voice was and why it's connected to the doll. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. Let's do some research. Maybe there's something about the doll's origin that can explain what's happening. Good idea. We should look in where you bought it, Mia replied, moving toward Emma's laptop on the desk. They quickly opened the browser, fingers flying across the keyboard as they searched for the antique shop's website. After scrolling through the pages, they found the shop's history section, detailing its long-standing reputation for selling unique, vintage items. The description mentioned that some pieces were said to have special histories, and that certain dolls were believed to carry the memories of their previous owners. Special histories? What does that even mean? Mia asked, brow furrowed in confusion. It could mean anything. Maybe the doll belonged to someone who had a tragic past, Emma speculated. Or maybe it has some connection to a different time. Their curiosity piqued. They dug deeper, uncovering stories of other dolls from the shop that had allegedly exhibited strange behavior. Some claimed to hear whispers, while others reported that the dolls moved when no one was watching. Each story seemed to echo their own experiences, sending chills down Emma's spine. Do you think we're dealing with something supernatural? Mia asked, glancing at the doll, which sat ominously on the bed. I don't know, but we need to find out more, Emma replied. Maybe we should visit the shop again. They might have more information on the doll's history. Mia nodded in agreement, but the apprehension in her eyes lingered. What if the shop owner knows something? What if they brought this on us? That's a risk we'll have to take, Emma said, determination settling over her. We can't let fear control us. With a plan in mind, they prepared to leave, but a sudden noise from the living room caused both girls to freeze. It was a soft thud, almost like the sound of something being dropped. Emma's heart raced as dread filled her chest. Did you hear that? She whispered. Yeah, what was that? Mia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's check it out, Emma said, steeling herself as she led the way down the dark hallway toward the source of the noise. Each step felt heavy, echoing in the silence as they approached the living room. Peering around the corner, they saw the source of the noise. The doll had somehow moved from the bed and was now sitting upright on the edge of the coffee table, staring at them. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't like that before, she gasped, her hands trembling. Mia swallowed hard, her eyes wide. This is getting really creepy, Emma. What do we do? Emma felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. We need to confront it. It's the only way to understand what's happening. Are you sure? Mia asked, a tremor in her voice. Yes, Emma replied firmly, stepping closer to the doll. I need to know why this is happening. As Emma reached out to touch the doll, the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that crackled like static electricity. The doll's eyes appeared to glimmer in the dim light, a sinister sparkle that sent shivers racing down her spine. Who are you? Emma demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. What do you want from me? For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to Emma's shock, the doll's mouth opened slightly, as if it were about to speak. The room felt heavy with anticipation, and she could feel Mia's presence behind her, tense and uncertain. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the living room, slamming the front door shut with a deafening bang. The force of the door echoed like a thunderclap, sending a shudder through the house. Emma jumped back, fear coursing through her as she glanced toward the door, heart racing. Mia, did you see that? Emma exclaimed, panic rising within her. I don't want to stick around to find out what else it can do. Mia cried, backing away from the doll. Emma's mind raced. No, we can't just run away. We need answers. But before she could argue further, the lights flickered again, and the room was briefly plunged into darkness. When they came back on, the doll had vanished. Where did it go? Mia gasped, looking around frantically. Stay close, Emma shouted, fear gripping her as she searched for the doll, but it was nowhere to be seen. Just then, Emma noticed something out of the corner of her eye, a flicker of movement in the hallway leading to the bathroom. "Over there," she pointed, her heart racing. Together, they approached the hallway cautiously, the air thick with tension. As they stepped closer, they could hear soft giggles echoing from the bathroom. The sound sent a chill down Emma's spine. It was as if a child was playing, but there was no child to be found. "Mia, this isn't funny," Emma called, her voice shaking. But the giggles only grew louder, a chilling symphony that seemed to taunt them. Emma's heart raced as she pushed the bathroom door open slowly, fear clawing at her insides. Inside, the lights flickered, and the doll stood in front of the mirror, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Emma," it whispered again, its voice a haunting melody that echoed in the small space. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the doll, realization dawning on her. The doll was not just an object. It was a conduit, a bridge to something darker. "Mia, we need to leave now," Emma urged, panic rising as she grabbed Mia's arm. But as they turned to flee, the bathroom door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Emma's heart raced as they banged against the door, desperate to escape. "Let us out," Mia screamed, her voice breaking with fear. The giggles grew louder, echoing around them, drowning out their pleas. Emma felt the walls closing in, the air thick with despair and the weight of something terrible looming just beyond the threshold. "Mia, we have to find a way out," Emma cried, her mind racing as she frantically searched for an escape. In the chaos, Emma caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror, but it was distorted, warped. The doll stood beside her, a sinister grin plastered across its face, as if it were enjoying their terror. "Emma," it whispered once more, its voice rising above the echoes of their fear. In that moment, Emma realized that confronting the doll was not just about understanding the mystery. It was about confronting the darkness within herself, the fears that had taken root and festered. "Mia, we can't let it control us," Emma shouted, determination surging within her. "We have to fight back." They turned to the doll, standing tall and unyielding. "You don't have power over us," Emma declared, her voice echoing in the small room. As if in response, the doll's smile widened, and the air grew colder. The walls trembled, and the giggles morphed in a manic laughter that filled the bathroom, threatening to swallow them whole. Emma clenched her fists, channeling her fear into strength. "We will not be afraid," she shouted, the sound reverberating like a rallying cry. The laughter grew more frenzied, but Emma refused to back down. With a fierce resolve, she grabbed the doll and lifted it high. "You don't own me." In a moment of clarity, she hurled the doll across the room, watching as it shattered against the wall, pieces scattering across the floor. The laughter fell silent, replaced by an eerie stillness. The bathroom door swung open, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Emma and Mia exchanged bewildered glances, their hearts racing from the adrenaline. "We did it," Mia breathed, astonished. Emma nodded, but uncertainty crept into her mind. Had they truly defeated the darkness, or had they merely stirred it? "I don't know what that was, but we need to figure it out," Emma said, determination settling in her chest. "We have to find out where this all began." They stepped out of the bathroom, the fragments of the doll glinting in the dim light like shattered memories. It was time to dig deeper, to confront the truths hidden in the shadows. As Emma and Mia stood in the dimly lit hallway, the weight of their recent ordeal settled over them like a fog. The remnants of the shattered doll lay strewn across the bathroom floor, a grim reminder of the confrontation they had just faced. Each shard glinted ominously in the light, whispering secrets of a darkness they had barely begun to understand. "Do you think it's really over?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting to the scattered pieces. "I don't know," Emma replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "But I feel like we only scratched the surface. There has to be a reason that doll was in that shop, and we need to find out what it is." Mia nodded, though the fear lingering in her eyes was palpable. "You're right, but where do we even start?" Let's go back to the antique shop tomorrow, Emma said decisively. We need to talk to the owner. Maybe they know more about that doll and its past. Mia shivered at the thought. What if it's still connected to the doll somehow? What if the shop is somehow cursed? Emma sighed, acknowledging her friend's fears. I don't know what we're dealing with, but we can't let fear control us. We have to be brave if we want to uncover the truth. The rest of the night was a blur of tension and uneasy silence. They tried to distract themselves with movies and snacks, but the atmosphere felt thick with uncertainty. Every creak of the house, every flicker of the lights sent their hearts racing. They huddled together on the couch, bracing for whatever might come next. As dawn broke, the soft light filtering through the curtains brought a sense of temporary calm. Emma felt a flicker of determination in her chest. They would confront this darkness head-on, and nothing would stop them. The next day, they arrived at the antique shop, the bell above the door ringing softly as they stepped inside. The familiar scent of aged wood and forgotten memories enveloped them, but the once inviting atmosphere now felt heavy with dread. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Hargrove, looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she saw their anxious faces. "Good morning, girls," she greeted, her voice warm yet laced with apprehension. "What brings you back so soon?" Emma exchanged a glance with Mia, gathering her courage. "We need to talk about the doll we bought. It has been acting strange." Ms. Hargrove's eyes widened, and she leaned closer. "Strange how? What have you experienced?" Emma hesitated, but felt compelled to share their story. "Last night, the doll moved on its own, and I heard a voice coming from it. It told me my name, and then we broke it, but I don't think that stopped anything." Ms. Hargrove's expression shifted to one of concern. "I'm afraid you may have awakened something that was meant to stay dormant. The doll is connected to a darker history, one that involves loss and sorrow." "What do you mean?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Hargrove hesitated, her gaze drifting to the dusty shelves filled with other dolls and trinkets. "Years ago, a young girl named Clara owned that doll. She loved it dearly, but her family faced tragedy. Clara passed away, and the doll was left behind, holding her essence. People who owned it afterward reported strange occurrences, but I didn't realize it would be this severe. I should have warned you." Emma's heart raced. "You knew? Why didn't you tell us?" "I thought it was just superstition," Ms. Hargrove admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't want to scare you away. But if it's been activated, you must find a way to calm its spirit before it spirals out of control." "Calm it? How do we do that?" Mia asked, panic rising in her voice. "There are stories of rituals," Ms. Hargrove replied. "You need to return to the place where it was created, the last location where it felt safe. That may involve confronting Clara's spirit and bringing closure." Emma felt a sense of urgency wash over her. "We have to do this. We can't let it hurt anyone else." Ms. Hargrove nodded. "I'll give you the address. But be careful. This won't be easy." As the shopkeeper scribbled the details on a piece of paper, Emma's mind raced. They were stepping into a realm they barely understood, facing a spirit trapped between worlds. "Thank you," Emma said, accepting the paper. "We'll do whatever it takes." After leaving the shop, they sat in Emma's car, staring at the address. A mixture of determination and dread churned within Emma. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, glancing at Mia. "I don't know," Mia admitted, her voice trembling. "But we have to try. We can't let this continue." With a deep breath, they set off toward the address Ms. Hargrove had given them, each mile feeling heavier than the last. The road wound through desolate countryside, the scenery shifting from familiar suburbia to the eerie tranquility of forgotten fields. As they drew closer, a sense of foreboding settled in their chests. Finally, they arrived at an old, weather-beaten house, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. The air was thick with anticipation, and Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. "Are you sure about this?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No turning back now," Emma replied, steeling herself. "We need to face whatever's inside." They stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking ominously under their weight. The door stood ajar, as if inviting them to enter, yet warning them of the dangers that lurked within. Taking a deep breath, they pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay. Shadows danced along the walls, creating a haunting atmosphere that sent chills racing down their spines. "Clara," Emma called out tentatively, her voice echoing through the empty halls. A soft whisper responded, barely audible, sending shivers through both girls. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, eyes wide with fear. Emma nodded, her heart racing. It's time to confront this spirit. As they ventured deeper into the house, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like an ominous breeze. They reached a room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. Emma exchanged a glance with Mia before pushing it open. Inside, the room was filled with faded memories, old toys, clothes, and remnants of a childhood long gone. In the center stood a dusty old bed, the covers strewn carelessly aside, as if a child had left in a hurry. "Clara," Emma called out, her voice filled with determination. "We're here to help you. We want to understand." The room fell silent, the air heavy with tension. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a translucent girl with sunken eyes and a sorrowful expression. Emma's heart raced as she recognized her from the photographs displayed on the walls. "Help me," Clara whispered, her voice a haunting echo that sent chills through the room. "I'm trapped in the dark." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, stepping closer. "The doll, it holds my sadness, my pain. You must release me." Clara's gaze was filled with a longing that tugged at Emma's heart. "What do we have to do?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Find the remnants of my joy," Clara instructed, her form flickering like a candle flame. "Only then will I be free." "Where do we find them?" Emma pressed, feeling the weight of Clara's sorrow. "In the garden, beneath the willow tree," Clara replied, her voice growing fainter. "But be careful. The darkness will try to stop you." With that, Clara's form faded into the shadows, leaving Emma and Mia standing in the room, filled with a mixture of dread and determination. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice steady as they left the room. As they stepped outside, the garden stretched before them, a tangled mess of overgrown weeds and wildflowers. At the center stood a towering willow tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze, as if beckoning them closer. "Do you really think we'll find something?" Mia asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Clara needs us," Emma replied firmly. "We can't give up now." They approached the willow, the air thick with tension. Emma knelt down, brushing aside the thick layers of leaves and dirt. Her fingers brushed against something solid, and she gasped, pulling away the debris to reveal a small, ornate box. "Is this it?" Mia asked, eyes wide with anticipation. "Only one way to find out," Emma replied, her heart racing as she opened the box. Inside lay a collection of small trinkets, each one a memory of a child's joy. A faded photograph of Clara with her family, a colorful bracelet, and a tiny music box that began to play a soft, melancholic tune as soon as Emma touched it. As the melody filled the air, a warm light enveloped them, and they could feel Clara's presence growing stronger. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice echoing around them. "You found my happiness." Emma and Mia exchanged hopeful glances. "How do we release you?" Emma called out. "By letting go," Clara replied, her form becoming more solid, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Help me remember the love." As the music played on, Emma and Mia closed their eyes and focused on Clara, envisioning the love that once surrounded her. They thought of family, laughter, and the innocence of childhood. Slowly, the darkness that had haunted the doll began to dissipate, and Clara's form shimmered like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Thank you," she whispered, her smile warm and radiant. "I'm free now." With those final words, Clara's spirit dissipated into the light, leaving behind a sense of peace that washed over the garden. Emma and Mia opened their eyes, the weight of fear lifting from their shoulders. "We did it," Mia breathed, disbelief washing over her. "Yeah, we did," Emma replied, a smile breaking across her face. "We freed her." As they made their way back to the car, Emma felt a sense of triumph. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But deep down, she knew that their journey was far from over. The world was filled with mysteries, and they were determined to unravel them all. The sunlight bathed the garden in warmth, a stark contrast to the heavy gloom that had hung over them just moments before. Emma and Mia stood side by side, the remnants of Clara's sorrow fading into the distance like a dark fog retreating before the dawn. "Can you believe we actually did it?" Mia said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I can't believe it either," Emma replied, still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had surged through her during the encounter. "But we can't lose sight of the fact that there's more to this story. Clara's freedom was just one piece of a much larger puzzle." They climbed into the car, the interior now feeling like a sanctuary from the chilling memories of the past. As Emma turned the key in the ignition, the engine roared to life, and a sense of purpose began to swell within her. They had faced a spirit trapped between worlds. What else might they uncover? "Where do we go from here?" Mia asked, gazing out at the passing scenery as they drove away from the old house. "I think we need to do some research," Emma said, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to find out more about Clara, the doll, and the history surrounding that antique shop. There's a reason this happened, and I want to understand it fully." Mia nodded, a flicker of excitement igniting in her eyes. "I know just the place. There's a local library that has archives on the town's history. We might find something about Clara and her family there." As they arrived at the library, Emma felt a rush of anticipation. The building stood tall and proud, its old brick facade exuding a sense of timelessness. The air inside was cool and filled with the scent of aged paper, which always felt like a treasure chest of hidden knowledge waiting to be unearthed. They approached the front desk, where a friendly librarian greeted them. "What can I help you with today?" she asked, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "We're looking for information about a girl named Clara," Emma began, her heart pounding. "She lived in this town many years ago." The librarian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Clara? We might have some records in our archives. Follow me." As they walked through the labyrinth of bookshelves, Emma felt the weight of the town's history pressing around them. Each book, each dusty corner held secrets of lives lived long ago. The librarian led them to a small room filled with old newspapers, photographs, and documents. "Here we are," the librarian said, gesturing toward a wooden table laden with artifacts. "You can start your research here." Emma and Mia eagerly sifted through the papers, flipping through yellowed pages filled with stories of joy, heartache, and the passage of time. After several minutes of searching, Mia gasped, her finger pointing to an article. "Look at this," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. Emma leaned in closer. The article detailed the tragic accident that had taken Clara's life. It described how she had been playing in the garden when a sudden storm had rolled in, causing a tree branch to fall and fatally injure her. The pain was palpable even through the ink, the sadness spilling over the words like a heavy rain. "Her family must have been devastated," Emma murmured, her heart aching for the young girl. "No wonder her spirit became trapped." Mia turned the page, revealing a photograph of Clara's family. Clara stood in the center, holding the very doll they had encountered in the antique shop. Her smile was bright and innocent, and for a moment, Emma felt a connection to the girl, as if Clara were reaching out from the past. What if the doll is more than just a vessel for her spirit? Mia pondered aloud. What if it's a reminder of her love too? Emma nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it's both, but we need to find out what happened to her family after the accident. There has to be more to this story. As they continued to dig through the archives, they discovered more articles and snippets about Clara's family. They had moved away shortly after the tragedy, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories. The last article they found mentioned the family's relocation to another town, but it offered little else. "Do you think we should try to find them?" Mia asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. "It could be worth a shot," Emma replied, her determination igniting once more. "They might have information that could help us understand the full extent of Clara's story." After some searching, they found the family's last known address, a modest home in a neighboring town. They exchanged glances, both feeling the weight of the decision before them. "Let's do it," Emma said, her heart racing at the prospect of confronting the unknown. "We owe it to Clara to understand what happened to her and her family." They left the library, the sun dipping lower in the sky as they headed toward their next destination. As they drove through the winding roads, Emma's mind swirled with questions. What if Clara's family had moved on? What if they held a key to unlocking the mysteries that surrounded the doll? After what felt like an eternity, they finally arrived at the house. It was small, surrounded by a white picket fence and blooming flowers that seemed to welcome them. Emma felt a surge of nerves as she parked the car, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you ready?" Mia asked, her voice shaky. "I think so," Emma replied, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "We just need to ask the right questions." They stepped out of the car and approached the front door, each step feeling like a journey into the unknown. Emma raised her hand and knocked softly. The sound echoed in the quiet air, and they waited with bated breath. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She looked surprised but intrigued at the sight of the two young girls standing before her. "Hello," the woman said warmly. "Can I help you?" "Hi, I'm Emma, and this is Mia." Emma introduced themselves, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. "We're looking for Clara's family. We found her doll, and we wanted to learn more about her." The woman's expression shifted to one of surprise and sadness. "Clara," she repeated softly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been many years since we lost her." Emma's heart sank, but she pressed on. "We heard about the accident. We just want to understand more about Clara and what happened to her." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Come in. I'd be happy to share what I can." They followed her inside, and the warmth of the home enveloped them. The walls were adorned with family photos, a testament to a life lived and a love that endured even through tragedy. The woman led them to a cozy living room, where they settled on a comfortable couch. "Clara was such a bright light in our lives," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "She was full of joy and laughter. Losing her was devastating." Emma felt a pang of empathy, realizing the depth of loss that Clara's family had endured. "We found her doll in an antique shop, and strange things have been happening since then," Emma explained. "We want to know how to help her." The woman looked thoughtful, her fingers brushing against a framed photograph of Clara. "The doll was a gift for her birthday. Clara cherished it above all else. After she passed, we couldn't bear to keep it. We thought maybe it would find a new home, but it seems Clara's spirit never truly left." Mia leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean by that? Did you ever experience anything strange with the doll?" The woman sighed, her eyes distant. "We had dreams about her. Sometimes, I'd hear her laughter echoing through the house, and I'd find her things moved around. It was like she was trying to reach out, but we didn't know how to help her. So, we decided to let her go." Emma felt a flicker of hope. "Maybe we can help her find peace. We've already freed her from some of her pain, but we need to understand what else she needs." The woman looked at them with a mix of hope and sorrow. "You're brave for wanting to do this. If anyone can help her, it's you too. Can you tell us more about Clara's favorite things? Anything that might help us understand her better?" Mia asked. "Of course," the woman replied, a smile breaking through her tears. "Clara loved the garden, especially the willow tree. She spent countless hours playing there, imagining it as her own kingdom. She adored music too. If you play a song that was special to her, it might resonate with her spirit." Emma felt a sense of clarity wash over her. "We have to return to the garden," she said, determination igniting within her. "It's where she felt happiest, and maybe that's where we'll find the final piece of the puzzle." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for wanting to help her. It means more than you can imagine." After exchanging contact information, Emma and Mia left the house, the weight of their mission feeling more tangible than ever. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the world, and the air crackled with the promise of the unknown. As they drove back toward the garden, Emma felt the thrill of anticipation, mixed with a hint of fear. They were on the verge of unraveling a mystery that had lingered for far too long, and the final confrontation with Clara's spirit loomed just ahead. "What if we can't help her?" Mia asked, her voice shaky as they neared the garden. Emma glanced at her, determination set in her eyes. "We can help her. We just have to believe in the love that connects us all." As they parked the car and stepped into the garden, the air felt charged with energy. They approached the willow tree, the gentle rustle of the leaves sounding like whispers of encouragement. "Let's play something for her," Mia suggested, pulling out her phone. They found a song that Clara had loved, and as the music filled the air, Emma closed her eyes, allowing the melody to wash over her. The garden transformed around them, memories weaving through the music, igniting the spirit of the girl they were determined to save. "Clara," Emma called out softly, her heart open and vulnerable. "We're here for you. We want to help you find peace." The air grew still, and Emma felt the weight of Clara's presence surrounding them. With the melody as their guide, they poured their love into the moment, willing the spirit to join them. Suddenly, a gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying with it a whisper that felt like Clara's voice. "Thank you," it seemed to say. "I remember the love." The doll, once a vessel of darkness, began to glow softly, illuminated by the warmth of the love that filled the space. Emma and Mia held hands, their hearts synchronized with the rhythm of the music, as they called out to Clara, urging her to embrace the light. The atmosphere crackled with energy as Clara's spirit began to emerge, her form shimmering like a dream. "You've come back for me," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've remembered my love." As the final notes of the song faded away, Clara stood before them, her face radiant and peaceful. "Thank you for freeing me from my sadness. I can finally go home." Emma felt tears well in her eyes, a mix of joy and relief flooding her heart. "You're free, Clara. You can find your happiness now." With a final, shimmering smile, Clara's spirit dissipated into a cascade of light, filling the garden with warmth and love. Emma and Mia stood in silence, the weight of their journey lifting from their shoulders. "We did it," Mia whispered, disbelief washing over her. "We actually did it?" "Yes," Emma replied, feeling a surge of triumph. "We freed her." As they walked back to the car, a sense of peace enveloped them, knowing they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The world was still filled with mysteries, but now they were armed with the understanding of love and courage. They were ready to face whatever came next. The glow of twilight bathed the garden in shades of orange and pink as Emma and Mia settled into the car, their hearts still racing from the encounter with Clara's spirit. The air was filled with a sense of triumph, yet an undercurrent of curiosity tugged at Emma's mind. They had freed Clara, but the mysteries surrounding the doll and the antique shop lingered, like shadows in the corners of her thoughts. As they drove away from the garden, the atmosphere felt different, lighter somehow. "What do you think happened to the doll?" Mia asked, glancing at Emma with a mix of intrigue and concern. "I'm not sure," Emma replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "But it feels like the doll was a key to something much bigger. Clara's story isn't just about her. It's about all the lives that were touched by her presence and the legacy she left behind." Mia nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We should go back to the antique shop. Maybe we can uncover more about its history and the other items they have. Clara's story might be just one of many." The idea resonated with Emma, and her resolve solidified. "Let's do it." We need to learn about the shop and its connection to the past. As they approached the antique shop, the fading daylight cast long shadows across the wooden sign that hung above the door, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very air held the whispers of the countless items that had passed through its doors. Stepping inside, the familiar scent of aged wood and nostalgia wrapped around them. The shop was a labyrinth of treasures, each corner brimming with stories waiting to be discovered. Emma and Mia walked deeper into the store, their senses heightened as they searched for anything that might provide insight into Clara's world. "Do you think the owner is here?" Mia asked, scanning the dimly lit aisles. "I hope so," Emma replied, glancing around. We need to speak with someone who knows the history of this place. Just then, the shopkeeper emerged from behind a collection of vintage clocks, his gray hair tousled and a welcoming smile on his face. Hello again. I see you've returned. Did you find what you were looking for? We did, actually, Emma said, stepping forward with renewed energy. We wanted to learn more about the doll we found and the history of this shop. It seems like there's a lot more to it than we realized. The shopkeeper's eyes lit up with interest. Ah, the doll. It has a fascinating backstory. Many of the items in this shop carry echoes of the past. Each piece tells a story, and the doll you found is no exception. Can you tell us more about it? Mia asked eagerly, leaning closer. The shopkeeper nodded, leading them to a small display case where the doll rested, now seemingly ordinary, but still holding an undeniable charm. This doll was crafted many decades ago, a labor of love by a woman named Margaret. She poured her heart into each stitch, believing the doll would bring joy to a child. But after Clara's tragic accident, the doll became a vessel for her grief and longing. Emma felt a pang of sadness as she listened, connecting the dots between the past and present. So, it wasn't just Clara's spirit that was tied to it. It's also a representation of the love that created it. Precisely, the shopkeeper said, his voice warm with understanding. Margaret was heartbroken after Clara's passing. She believed that by releasing the doll into the world, she could let go of her grief. But Clara's spirit remained, seeking solace. Mia frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. So, the doll has both a joyous origin and a sorrowful tale intertwined with it. Exactly, the shopkeeper affirmed. It's a poignant reminder of love's complexity. Clara's story is not just about loss. It's about the bond that can exist even in separation. Emma glanced at Mia, a sense of clarity washing over them. We thought we were just helping Clara, but we've also honored the love that created her doll. It's about recognizing that love doesn't fade. It transforms. The shopkeeper smiled at their understanding. You're wise beyond your years. Many forget that the past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. You've freed Clara, and in doing so, you've allowed her story to continue. But it also means embracing the memories of those who created the joy and sorrow. Emma's heart swelled with the profound weight of the revelation. Is there a way to ensure that Clara's story lives on? That others can find comfort in it? The shopkeeper considered her question, then nodded thoughtfully. You might consider sharing her story. Maybe write about it or create something that reflects the love and loss she experienced. There are countless souls who would benefit from the understanding that even in grief, love endures. Inspired, Emma felt a rush of creativity ignite within her. What if we document our journey? Share Clara's story through a short film or a written piece. We could interview people, gather memories, and bring Clara's spirit back to life in a new way. Mia's eyes sparkled with excitement. That's a brilliant idea. We could create a project that not only honors Clara, but also inspires others to recognize the beauty in their own stories. Just remember, the shopkeeper cautioned gently, stories have a way of influencing the world around us. Approach this with love and sincerity, and you will find the right path. As they left the antique shop, Emma felt invigorated by their newfound purpose. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town. The echoes of Clara's laughter seemed to linger in the air, intertwining with their own hopes for the future. Where do we start? Mia asked, her enthusiasm infectious. We can begin by reaching out to people who knew Clara, Emma suggested. We should look for local historians or anyone who might have stories to share about her and her family. We'll create a narrative that celebrates love, loss, and the strength of the human spirit. Mia nodded vigorously. And we should definitely include interviews and personal anecdotes. It'll make the story feel alive. As they drove back home, a sense of direction guided them, filling the car with palpable excitement. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were embarking on a journey that would transcend their own lives and touch the hearts of others. They spent the next few days planning and researching, reaching out to local community centers, historians, and anyone who might have known Clara. Each contact brought them closer to understanding the girl who had touched their lives in such a profound way. As they gathered stories, Emma felt the weight of Clara's legacy unfurling before them like a tapestry woven from countless threads. The stories flowed in, memories from family friends, tales of laughter and joy, and poignant reflections on the impact Clara had on everyone she met. One afternoon, they received a message from a woman who had known Clara as a child. She expressed her desire to meet and share her memories. Emma and Mia exchanged excited glances, knowing this could be a pivotal moment in their project. "Let's meet her at the park," Emma suggested, envisioning the lush greenery and open skies as the perfect backdrop for their conversation. On the day of the meeting, the park buzzed with life. Children played on swings, laughter echoing through the air as families picnicked on the grass. Emma and Mia arrived early, their hearts racing with anticipation. "Do you think she'll remember much?" Mia asked, glancing around. "I hope so," Emma replied. "Every memory counts, no matter how small." As they waited, a figure approached them, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She looked to be in her 60s, her hair touched with gray, but her spirit vibrant. Emma felt an instant connection. "Hi, you must be Emma and Mia," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Mrs. Lawson. It's so lovely to meet you both." "Thank you for coming," Emma said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We're excited to hear your memories of Clara." Mrs. Lawson nodded, her smile softening as she settled onto a nearby bench. "Clara was a special girl. I remember her infectious laughter and how she brought light to everyone around her. We would often play by the willow tree in her garden. She loved that tree." Emma felt a warm rush of nostalgia as Mrs. Lawson spoke. "What do you remember most about those times?" she asked, leaning in to capture every detail. Mrs. Lawson's eyes sparkled with the joy of reminiscence. "We would create elaborate stories, pretend we were princesses in a magical kingdom. Clara had an imagination that knew no bounds. She could turn anything into an adventure." As she spoke, Emma felt a connection growing, as if Clara herself were present in the moment, listening with delight. Mrs. Lawson continued, sharing tales of their childhood games, their laughter echoing through the years. "Clara had this wonderful way of seeing the beauty in everything," Mrs. Lawson said, her voice tinged with both joy and sorrow. "Even after her passing, I felt her presence in my dreams. I believe she still watches over us." Emma felt her heart swell with emotion. "We want to honor Clara's memory through our project. We want to capture her spirit and share it with others." Mrs. Lawson's eyes filled with tears. "That's a beautiful idea. Clara would be so proud of you both. She brought so much happiness into our lives, and I know she would love to see her story continue." As they talked, Emma realized how the threads of Clara's life intertwined with those around her. Each memory shared was a testament to the impact she had made, a reminder that love transcends even the boundaries of life and death. The sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park. Emma felt a sense of closure wash over her as they wrapped up their conversation. But it was just the beginning of their journey. They had gathered another piece of Clara's story, and she was determined to uncover more. As they said their goodbyes, Emma and Mia exchanged excited glances. "This is just the start," Mia said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "We need to reach out to more people, find out everything we can about Clara's life." Emma nodded, her heart racing with inspiration. "Yes, we'll gather stories, create a narrative, and celebrate Clara's legacy. We'll ensure she is remembered in a way that reflects her true spirit." With renewed determination, they set off to continue their quest, armed with the stories and memories that would shape their project into something extraordinary. The days turned into weeks as Emma and Mia immersed themselves in their project, poring over Clara's memories, conducting interviews, and collecting artifacts that captured the essence of her life. Each new story brought fresh insights, painting a vivid tapestry of Clara's world and the people who loved her. They felt as if they were piecing together a puzzle that had been waiting to be solved. One afternoon, they found themselves back in the antique shop, surrounded by the familiar scent of nostalgia and the comforting murmur of history. They had planned to meet with the shopkeeper again to discuss their findings and gather more information about Clara's doll. As they approached the counter, the shopkeeper greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome back. I trust your journey has been fruitful." "It has," Emma exclaimed, her excitement bubbling over. "We've spoken to several people who knew Clara, and the stories they've shared are incredible. We're beginning to piece together a beautiful narrative." "Ah, that's wonderful to hear." The shopkeeper's eyes sparkled with pride. "Every story matters, and Clara's legacy deserves to be told." Emma and Mia began recounting their experiences, sharing anecdotes and snippets of the vibrant memories they had collected. The shopkeeper listened intently, occasionally interjecting with insights that deepened their understanding of the connections between Clara's life, her doll, and the antique shop itself. "I've been thinking a lot about the significance of Clara's doll," Emma said, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It seems like it played such a crucial role in her story, but I can't help but wonder if there's more to it than what we've uncovered." The shopkeeper nodded, his expression turning contemplative. "Indeed, the doll is a vessel of emotions, a conduit for the love and sorrow it has witnessed. Clara poured her essence into it, and in turn, it captured her spirit. But its power goes beyond her alone." "What do you mean?" Mia asked, intrigued. "The doll has been in the shop for many years," he explained, leaning closer. "Over time, it has attracted the energies and emotions of those who interacted with it. Clara's spirit is just one of many. Each piece in this shop carries echoes of its past, intertwined with the stories of those who cherished them." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. "So, Clara's doll might hold fragments of other stories too? Perhaps the stories of those who loved it or those who feared it." "Exactly," the shopkeeper affirmed. "Each item here is a storyteller, waiting for someone to listen. Clara's doll is a reflection of love and loss, but it also embodies the fears and hopes of others who have crossed its path." Mia's eyes widened with understanding. "So, the doll could be a portal of sorts, connecting all these lives and experiences together?" "Precisely," the shopkeeper replied. "And through your project, you have the opportunity to not only honor Clara's story, but also shed light on the interconnectedness of the human experience." Emma and Mia exchanged glances, the weight of their mission sinking in. "We need to dig deeper," Emma said, her voice steady with resolve. "We can't just tell Clara's story. We should also explore the lives of those who intersected with hers, especially those who encountered the doll." With a newfound sense of purpose, they left the antique shop, eager to reach out to more people in their community. They began documenting the stories of individuals who had owned or interacted with the doll, creating a rich mosaic of emotions and experiences. One afternoon, they received a message from a local historian who specialized in the town's folklore and legends. Intrigued, Emma and Mia arranged to meet him at the local library, excited to uncover even more layers of Clara's story. The library was a haven of knowledge, its walls lined with dusty books and hidden gems of history. They found the historian, a kindly man with a passion for storytelling, who welcomed them with enthusiasm. "I've heard about your project and Clara's doll," he said, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "There are tales woven into the fabric of this town, and I believe Clara's story is one of them. Can you tell us more?" Emma asked, her heart racing with anticipation. The historian led them to a quiet corner of the library, surrounded by shelves of books filled with tales of love, loss, and the supernatural. Clara's life is intertwined with a local legend, a tale of a girl who mysteriously vanished many years ago, only to be found again through the whispers of a doll. Mia leaned in, captivated. "What happened?" "Legend has it that Clara's doll was once owned by another girl named Lila, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances," the historian explained. After her return, she claimed that a doll had guided her back home, helping her navigate a world that had turned dark. The story suggests that Clara's doll could hold a similar power, a connection to realms beyond our understanding. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "So the doll has been part of two stories now, Clara's and Lila's. What does that mean for our project?" "It means you're not just telling Clara's story," the historian said, his voice resonating with gravitas. You're uncovering a legacy that spans generations. The doll embodies the struggles and triumphs of many young girls who sought solace, guidance, or even protection from unseen forces. Mia exchanged a knowing look with Emma. We need to include Lila's story in our project. It could provide a deeper understanding of Clara's experiences and the power of the doll. The historian nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. It would enrich your narrative immensely. Explore the connections, the themes of love, loss, and resilience that intertwine their stories. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Emma and Mia set out on a mission to uncover Lila's story, reaching out to historians, old town records, and anyone who might have known her. Each connection they made revealed more about the fabric of their town's history, linking Clara and Lila in ways they had never anticipated. As they gathered the pieces, Emma couldn't help but feel that the stories were not just about the girls themselves. They were about the power of memory, the significance of community, and the strength found in vulnerability. Clara's spirit was guiding them, encouraging them to weave together a narrative that honored not only her life, but also the lives of those who had come before her. The culmination of their efforts began to take shape, and Emma envisioned their project not just as a tribute, but as a celebration of resilience and love. They planned to create a multifaceted presentation that intertwined interviews, stories, and historical context, all encapsulated within the framework of the doll's journey. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Emma felt a familiar presence in the room. She looked up from her laptop, her heart racing. The doll sat on the shelf, still and silent, yet she felt an inexplicable connection to it, a bond that went beyond the physical. "Mia," Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever feel like Clara is watching over us?" Mia glanced up, her expression thoughtful. "I do. It's like she's guiding us, making sure we tell her story the way it deserves to be told." Emma smiled, warmth flooding her heart. "Let's make sure we honor her, Lila, and everyone who has been touched by this journey. They deserve to be remembered." As the night deepened around them, the weight of their purpose settled in, and Emma felt a renewed sense of clarity. They were on the brink of something extraordinary, a moment that would forever change their lives and the lives of others. The day of the presentation arrived, and a mixture of excitement and anxiety buzzed through the air. Emma and Mia stood in front of a small audience in the local community center, ready to unveil their project, a labor of love that had consumed their hearts and minds for months. They had transformed the stories of Clara and Lila into an engaging narrative that would resonate with everyone present. As they looked out at the familiar faces in the crowd, friends, family, and community members, they felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had invited Clara's family and even a few people who had known Lila, hoping to weave together a tapestry of memories that honored both girls. "Thank you all for being here today," Emma began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "This project is a celebration of Clara and Lila, two girls whose lives were intertwined in ways we could never have imagined. Through their stories, we hope to illuminate the connections that bind us all." Mia stepped forward, her eyes shining with passion. "We've spent countless hours gathering stories, artifacts, and memories. What started as a simple quest to learn more about Clara's doll evolved into a journey of discovery, one that revealed the depth of human experience, love, and resilience." The audience listened intently as Emma and Mia shared snippets of their findings. They recounted Clara's childhood, her laughter echoing through the hall as they described her playful spirit. They spoke of Lila's mysterious disappearance and the chilling legend that surrounded her return, emphasizing the importance of each girl's legacy. As they unveiled photographs, letters, and artifacts associated with Clara and Lila, gasps of recognition filled the room. The doll, a central figure in their narrative, sat elegantly on display, embodying the stories they had gathered. Emma watched as Clara's family exchanged glances, a mixture of pride and bittersweet remembrance reflected in their eyes. Throughout the presentation, Emma felt Clara's presence guiding her, urging her to dig deeper into the essence of the girls' lives. The audience responded with palpable energy, offering stories of their own, tales of love, loss, and the enduring bonds of friendship that transcended time. Midway through the presentation, Emma invited Clara's grandmother, who had been seated in the front row, to share her memories. The elderly woman rose, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the microphone. Clara was a light in our lives, she began, her voice trembling but steady. She had a way of making everyone feel special, and that doll, oh, it was her constant companion. It was more than a toy. It was her confidant, a friend who listened to her dreams. Tears glistened in the eyes of many as Clara's grandmother recounted moments of joy and laughter. The stories poured forth, each one connecting the dots between Clara and Lila, revealing how their lives had influenced each other even in ways they hadn't realized. As the presentation progressed, Mia took the stage, highlighting the impact of the community in preserving the memory of both girls. She shared how the stories they uncovered were not just about Clara and Lila. They were also about the connections formed through shared experiences and the strength found in vulnerability. Every one of us carries a story, Mia emphasized, her voice resonating with sincerity. It's the stories that connect us, that remind us we are not alone in our struggles and triumphs. Clara and Lila's journeys remind us to cherish the memories we create and the people we love. After Mia spoke, Emma opened the floor for discussion, encouraging the audience to share their own connections to Clara, Lila, or even the doll. One by one, people rose to speak, weaving their own narratives into the fabric of the presentation. Laughter and tears intertwined, each voice adding another thread to the tapestry of memories they had created. Emma felt a surge of warmth as she listened. The atmosphere in the room transformed, shifting from one of mourning to one of celebration. Clara and Lila were not just stories from the past. They were alive in the hearts of those who remembered them. As the event drew to a close, Emma and Mia thanked everyone for their contributions, expressing how grateful they were to have shared this journey. Our hope is that this project becomes a living testament to Clara and Lila's legacy, Emma said, her eyes shining with gratitude. May their stories inspire future generations to embrace love, connection, and the power of community. The audience erupted into applause, a beautiful cacophony of appreciation that echoed through the hall. Emma and Mia exchanged proud smiles, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. They had honored Clara and Lila, capturing the essence of their lives in a way that would resonate for years to come. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma noticed Clara's grandmother lingering by the display. She approached her, feeling an overwhelming urge to express her gratitude. "Thank you for sharing Clara with us today," Emma said softly. "It means so much to know her story will live on." The grandmother smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've done more than just share her story. You've given her a voice, a legacy. Clara would be so proud." Emma's heart swelled at the thought. Clara's spirit was alive and well, woven into the fabric of their community. The doll, once an object of fear and curiosity, had transformed into a symbol of love and connection. As Emma and Mia packed up their materials, they felt a sense of closure. The journey they had embarked on had not only connected them to Clara and Lila, but had also deepened their bonds with one another and their community. They had shared stories of resilience and hope, proving that even in the face of loss, love endures. Later that evening, as Emma lay in bed, she glanced over at the doll on her shelf. Its porcelain face seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, and she felt a gentle warmth radiating from it. She closed her eyes, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. Clara and Lila were not just memories. They were part of a larger narrative, a story that would continue to unfold through the lives they had touched. With that thought, Emma drifted off to sleep, comforted by the knowledge that Clara's legacy would live on, intertwined with the stories of all who had loved her. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.